Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Samuel Blackthorne, and I've been a park ranger at Cumberland Gap for 14 years. People call me Sam. I know these mountains like they're part of my blood, which maybe they are. My family's been in these hills since before anyone kept proper records. The morning everything changed started like any other. September mist hung thick between the pine trees, and the air smelled like wet leaves and old earth. I was checking the trail markers near Pinnacle Overlook when my radio crackled. "Sam, you there?" It was Jenny from the visitor center. She sounded worried. "Yeah, what's up?" "Got some hikers here. They're pretty shaken up. Say they saw something weird on the Daniel Boone Trail yesterday evening." I sighed. Weird usually meant bears, or maybe someone's unleashed dog. City folks scared easy in the woods. What kind of weird? They say they met people who weren't quite people. That made me pause. In 14 years, I'd heard every kind of story. Lost hikers, strange lights, even a few Bigfoot sightings. But something in Jenny's voice told me this was different. The hikers were a young couple from Nashville. The woman, Sarah, kept wrapping her arms around herself like she was cold, even though it was warm in the visitor center. Her boyfriend, Mike, did most of the talking. "We were heading back to camp around sunset," he said. "Maybe a quarter-mile past Tri-State Peak. That's when we saw them." "Them?" "A family. Man, woman, couple kids. They were just standing there beside the trail like they were waiting for us." Sarah spoke up, her voice shaky. "Their eyes were wrong, all of them. The color kept changing." Mike nodded. "And their faces, it was like looking at someone through water. Everything kept shifting just a little bit." I'd heard plenty of stories like this over the years. Tired hikers, dim light, imagination running wild. But Sarah suddenly, I grabbed my arm. The little girl spoke to us. She knew my name. She said, "Hello, Sarah, you shouldn't be walking alone in the dark." But I never told her my name, and Mike was right there beside me. The hair on my neck stood up. I didn't know why, but something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. After they left, I radioed Dr. Rebecca Montrose. She was the park historian, spent most of her time in dusty archives, but she knew these mountain stories better than anyone. "Rebecca, you got a minute? I need to ask you something about local families." "Sure, Sam. What's on your mind?" "Ever hear anything about families around here who, I don't know, seem different somehow?" There was a long pause. "Different how? Like maybe they're not quite what they appear to be." Another pause, longer this time. "Sam, are you asking about the Melungeons?" The name hit me like a cold wind. I'd heard it whispered by old-timers my whole life, usually followed by warnings to stay away from certain hollers and ridgelines. My own grandmother used to hush up whenever someone mentioned that name. "What do you know about them?" I asked. "More than I probably should. Meet me at my office after hours. And Sam, don't talk to anyone else about this. Not yet." The rest of the day dragged by. I tried to focus on normal ranger duties, checking campsites, giving trail advice to day hikers, fixing a broken gate latch. But my mind kept drifting to those hikers' scared faces and that name, Melungeon. When evening came, I found Rebecca waiting in her office. She had files spread across her desk, old papers that looked yellow and fragile. "The Melungeons," she said without looking up, "were one of the biggest mysteries in Appalachian history. Mixed-race mountain people who appeared in these hills in the early 1800s. Nobody knew where they came from." She pulled out an old photograph. The faces looking back at me were familiar somehow. High cheekbones, dark hair, eyes that seemed to hold secrets. They claimed to be Portuguese, or sometimes Cherokee or Turkish. Always had a different story depending on who was asking. But the mountain folks, they whispered different things, said the Melungeons could change their faces. said they weren't quite human. My mouth felt dry. Just old mountain superstition, right? Rebecca looked at me directly for the first time. Sam, what's your grandmother's maiden name? Mullins. Why? She slid another paper across the desk. It was an old census record from 1880. There, halfway down the page, was a family listed as Mullins Melungeon. Your great-great-grandmother, Sam. She was listed as Melungeon in 3 different records. I stared at the paper, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. All those whispered family stories, all those warnings about staying away from certain people and places, all those times my grandmother would get quiet when I asked about our family history. That doesn't mean anything, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. Rebecca gathered up the files. Maybe not, but Sam, if those hikers really did see what they think they saw, you might want to start asking your family some questions. Walking back to my truck, the mountains felt different around me. The shadows seemed deeper, and every sound in the woods made me turn around. For the first time in my life, these hills I'd always called home felt like they were watching me. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I could swear I heard my grandmother's voice whispering the words she'd said so many times when I was little. Some bloodlines carry more than just genetics, Samuel. Some carry things that never died. The next morning brought fog so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. I was driving the back roads, checking on remote campsites, when I saw smoke rising from a holler I'd thought was empty. The Sizemore place sat at the end of a dirt road that most maps didn't show. I'd known about the old cabin my whole life, but figured it had been abandoned for years. Now I could see a thin line of smoke coming from the chimney. I parked my truck and walked up the overgrown path. The cabin looked like it belonged to another century. Rough-hewn logs, a tin roof green with moss, windows that were just dark squares in the walls. "Hello?" I called out. "Park ranger. Just checking to make sure everyone's okay up here." The door opened before I finished speaking, like someone had been watching me walk up. An elderly woman stepped out onto the porch. She was small and thin, with silver hair braided down her back and the kind of weathered face that came from decades in the mountains. "You're Sarah Blackthorn's grandson," she said. It wasn't a question. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "How did you know my grandmother?" The woman smiled, and for just a second her face seemed to shift, like looking at a reflection in moving water. "I knew your whole family, boy. Come inside. We need to talk." Everything in me said to turn around and leave. But something else, something deeper, pulled me toward that cabin door. Inside, the cabin was bigger than it looked from outside. Oil lamps gave off warm yellow light, and herbs hung drying from the rafters. The air smelled like sage and something I couldn't identify, something wild and earthy. "Sit," the woman said, pointing to a chair by the fire. "I'm May Sizemore. My family's been in this holler since before the park was even an idea." I sat down but kept my hand near my radio. "Mrs. Sizemore, I had some hikers report seeing your family on the trail yesterday. They seemed concerned." May laughed, a sound like water running over stones. "Concerned? That's a nice way to put it. They were terrified." "Why would they be terrified?" Instead of answering, May turned toward the back of the cabin. "Children, come say hi. Hello to the ranger." 2 kids appeared from the shadows. A girl about 10 and a boy maybe 12. They moved without making any sound at all, and their eyes were the color of old gold, and they seemed to catch the lamplight like an animal's. "This is Lily," May said, putting her hand on the girl's shoulder. "And this is Thomas." The girl, Lily, looked right at me and smiled. "You're starting to remember, aren't you, Sam?" Her voice was perfectly normal, but hearing my name come from her lips made my hands shake. These were the kids the hikers had seen. I was sure of it. "Remember what?" I managed to ask. Thomas stepped forward. As he moved closer to the fire, the light hit his face, and I saw something impossible. For just a moment his features shifted. His nose became longer, more pointed. His ears seemed to grow. His whole face became something that was human, but more than human. I jumped up so fast I knocked over my chair. "What the hell?" "Language," May said calmly. "Children are present. What are you?" I backed toward the door, but my legs felt like water. "We're your family, Samuel." May's voice was gentle, but there was something else in it. Something that made every instinct scream at me to run. "Your blood calls to ours. It has for generations." "That's impossible." Lily walked over and picked up my fallen chair like it weighed nothing. Her small hands looked normal until she set the chair down. Then I saw the fingernails. Too long, too sharp, more like claws. "Your grandmother knew," May said. Sarah Blackthorne understood what she carried in her veins. She just chose to bury it deep. But it's still there, Samuel. In you. The room felt like it was spinning. My grandmother was normal. She was just a mountain woman who knew old stories. Stories, Thomas laughed, and the sound was too deep for a 12-year-old boy. "Is that what she told you they were?" May moved to the window and looked out at the fog-wrapped woods. The blood doesn't lie dormant forever. Stress wakes it up. Fear wakes it up. And there's been plenty of both. "What do you mean?" "Government men," Lily said, her golden eyes narrowing. "They've been asking questions in town, looking through old records. They know about us." My radio crackled suddenly, making everyone in the room freeze. Jenny's voice came through, tight with worry. "Sam, you there? We got a problem." I fumbled for the radio, my hands still shaking. "Yeah, I'm here." "Those federal agents are back, the ones who were here last month asking about genealogy records. They're at the visitor center with some kind of warrant." May's face went pale. Thomas and Lily moved closer to their grandmother, and I could see something changing in all of them. The air in the cabin felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. "Sam," Jenny continued, "they're specifically asking about families named Sizemore, Mullins, and Collins. They want to know where they live." The radio fell from my hand and clattered on the wooden floor. May was looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. "They know," she whispered. "After all these years, they finally know." "Know what?" But May was already moving, gathering things from around the cabin with quick, practiced movements. "Children, we have to go, now." "Mrs. Sizemore, wait." She stopped and looked at me. This time there was no mistaking what I saw. Her face shifted completely, bones moving beneath the skin, features rearranging themselves. For a moment she looked like a completely different person. Then she was herself again. "You have a choice, Samuel Blackthorne," she said. "You can pretend you never came here, never saw us. Go back to your normal life and hope they don't come for you too. Or you can stop running from what you are and help us survive what's coming." The radio crackled again. "Sam, they're asking specifically about you too, about your family history." Outside, I could hear engines in the distance getting closer. May grabbed my arm, and her grip was stronger than any old woman should be. "Decide," she said, "but decide fast." I made my choice, without thinking. Maybe it was the terror in the children's eyes, or maybe it was something deeper, something in my blood that May had awakened. But when I heard those engines getting closer, I knew I couldn't just walk away. "Come with me," I said. "I know these mountains better than anyone. I can get you somewhere safe." May nodded, and I saw something like relief in her strange eyes. "Thomas, Lily, gather only what you can carry." We left through the back of the cabin as the first black SUVs pulled into the clearing. I led them up a game trail I'd known since I was a kid, one that wound through thick pine groves and rocky outcrops where vehicles couldn't follow. Behind us, I could hear doors slamming and voices shouting orders. Flashlight beams cut through the fog like white knives. "This way," I whispered, leading them toward a cluster of boulders where we could hide. We crouched behind the rocks, and I tried to control my breathing. Through the gaps, I could see agents in dark suits moving around the cabin with equipment I didn't recognize. Cameras, sensors, things that beeped and flashed. One of them spoke into a radio. "Base camp, this is Team 3. The subjects have fled, but there are clear signs of supernatural activity. Recommend immediate area lockdown. Supernatural activity. They said it like it was just another item on a checklist. Lily touched my arm and I nearly jumped out of my skin. She pointed deeper into the woods where more flashlights were moving between the trees. They were surrounding us. "How many ways out of this holler?" May whispered. "Two," I said. "The road we came in on, and a ridge trail that leads to Pinnacle Rock. But that trail's rough. It'll take hours." "Then we take the ridge trail." May looked at her grandchildren. "Children, it's time to show Mr. Sam who we really are. What happened next will live in my nightmares forever." And Thomas closed his eyes and took a deep breath. His whole body began to change. Not just his face this time, but everything. His bones stretched and reformed. His skin rippled like water. Dark hair sprouted all over his body. In less than 30 seconds, a 12-year-old boy had become something that was half human, half wolf. Lily's transformation was different, but just as terrifying. Her features sharpened, her eyes grew larger and more luminous. Her fingers became long and thin, with claws that could probably tear through tree bark. When she looked at me, her face was beautiful and terrible at the same time. May's change was the most complete. She became something ancient and wild, not quite human, not quite animal, but something that belonged to the deep woods and the spaces between shadows. "Don't be afraid," she said, but her voice had changed too. It sounded like wind through pine branches. "This is what we've always been." The agents were getting closer. I could hear their radios crackling and their boots crushing through the underbrush. "Follow me," Thomas growled. His voice was completely different now, deeper, rougher. "I know paths they can't track." We started moving through the woods, and I quickly realized that the Sizemores didn't need trails. They flowed between the trees like they were part of the forest itself. Thomas led, sniffing the air and listening for sounds I couldn't hear. Lily moved like a dancer, never stepping on a twig or rustling a leaf. May seemed to glide over the rough ground. And me? I stumbled along behind them, feeling clumsy and loud and completely human. We'd gone maybe half a mile when I heard something that made my blood freeze. Dogs barking, tracking dogs. "They brought hounds," I said. May stopped so suddenly I almost ran into her. "That's not good." "Why? Can't you just, I don't know, confuse them with your scent?" Thomas laughed, but there was no humor in it. "These aren't regular tracking dogs, Sam. The government's been hunting our kind for decades. They breed special dogs for it, dogs that can smell what we really are." The barking was getting closer, and now I could hear the agents shouting to each other. They were coordinating, closing the net. "There's a cave system up ahead," I said. "Devil's Kitchen, locals call it. If we can get there..." A gunshot rang out, close enough to make my ears ring. A tree branch 6 inches from my head exploded in a shower of splinters. "Warning shots," May said. "They want us alive." "Move," Thomas snarled. We ran. Not the careful, quiet movement we'd been doing, but an all-out sprint through the dark woods. Branches whipped at my face and roots tried to trip me, but somehow I kept up. Then I felt it. Something changing inside me. My vision got sharper. I could suddenly see details in the darkness that had been invisible before. My hearing became more acute. I could track the agents by their heartbeats and breathing. My hands looked different in the moonlight. The fingers were longer, and the nails had grown into points. When I touched my face, it felt wrong. The bones had shifted. The proportions had changed. "May?" I called out, trying not to panic. "Something's happening to me." She looked back, and her transformed face showed something like pride. "Your blood is waking up, Samuel. About time." We reached Devil's Kitchen just as the dogs burst through the tree line behind us. The cave mouth was a black hole in the rock face, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. "Inside," May ordered. "Quickly." I went first, using my suddenly improved night vision to navigate the narrow passage. The others followed, and I could hear the agents reaching the cave entrance just as Lily disappeared into the darkness. "Seal it off," someone shouted outside. "They can't get out any other way." We were trapped. The cave opened up into a larger chamber about 50 feet in. I'd explored this system as a teenager, but it looked different now. My changed vision picked up details I'd never noticed before. Symbols carved into the walls, old fire circles, bones that looked too big to belong to any normal animal. This place, May said softly. Our people used it long before the park was ever built. How long before? I asked. Centuries, Samuel. Since we first came to these mountains. Since we first learned to hide what we really are. Outside, I could hear the agents setting up equipment. Lights blazed at the cave mouth, and the sound of generators filled the air. We can wait them out, I said. There are other passages deeper in the cave. I can lead us. A new voice echoed from the entrance, amplified by some kind of speaker system. A woman's voice, and one that made my heart sink. Dr. Rebecca Montrose, park historian. I know you can hear me in there. May's transformed features twisted with anger. Your friend? I closed my eyes. She was helping me research the Melungeons. I thought she was just interested in the history. Rebecca's voice continued. Sam, I know you're confused right now, but these people, they're not what they seem. They're dangerous, and they've been hiding among us for generations. We're here to help. Help, Thomas spat. Right. The government has been studying this phenomenon for years, Rebecca went on. These shapeshifters, these Melungeons, they're not natural. They're a threat to normal humans. But we can help you, Sam. We can stop what's happening to you before it's too late. I looked down at my hands, at the claws that had grown where my fingernails used to be. Maybe she's right. Maybe I am becoming something dangerous. May moved closer to me. Even in her transformed state, there was something comforting about her presence. Samuel, listen to me very carefully. What we are, what you're becoming, isn't evil. We're guardians, protectors of these mountains and everything that lives in them. Your people have kept that secret for generations. Then why is the government hunting us? Because, Lily said, her voice now carrying strange harmonics that seemed to resonate in the cave walls. They're afraid of things they can't control, and they want our abilities for themselves. Rebecca's voice came again, closer this time. Sam, we know about your family history. We know about the genetic markers. But it's not too late to choose humanity over whatever they're turning you into. I felt something snap inside me. The pain and fear and confusion of the last 2 days crystallized into a single, burning anger. They're not turning me into anything, I shouted toward the cave entrance. This is what I've always been. The moment I said it, I knew it was true. All those times I'd felt more at home in the deep woods than in town. All those nights I'd dreamed of running through the forest on 4 legs. All those moments when I'd seemed to understand what the animals were thinking. It had never been imagination. It had been memory, trying to break free. Outside, the generators suddenly cut off. The cave plunged into darkness, except for the 4 of us. Our eyes glowed in the black air like fallen stars. They're coming in, Thomas growled. And I realized that the real nightmare was about to begin. The first agent through the cave entrance was wearing night vision goggles and carrying some kind of electrified net launcher. He took one look at our glowing eyes in the darkness and froze. That hesitation cost him. Thomas moved faster than anything human should be able to move. One moment he was crouched beside me, the next he was on top of the agent. The man's weapon clattered away into the darkness, and his night vision goggles sparked and went dead. Non-lethal takedown only, Rebecca's voice echoed from outside. We need the subjects alive. More agents poured into the cave, their tactical lights cutting through the darkness like swords. But our night vision was perfect, and we could see them coming long before they could see us. May gestured for me to stay back while she and the children handled the intruders. What I saw next shattered every belief I'd ever had about the natural world. Lily moved like she was dancing with the shadows themselves, appearing and disappearing faster than the agents could track. Their tranquilizer darts sailed harmlessly through empty air where she'd been standing just seconds before. May became something I couldn't even properly describe. Part woman, part wolf, part something older and wilder than either. She disabled agents with surgical precision, never seriously hurting them, but leaving them unconscious or too disoriented to fight. Thomas was the most terrifying. He'd become something that belonged in nightmares, a perfect fusion of human intelligence and predatory instinct. He moved through the agents like they were standing still, but there were too many of them. For every one we stopped, 2 more came through the entrance, and they were learning, adapting their tactics. "Fall back deeper into the cave," May ordered. "There's another chamber." A new sound cut through the chaos, a high-pitched whining that seemed to vibrate inside my skull. The agents had brought some kind of sonic weapon, and it was specifically tuned to hurt us. Lily cried out and fell to her knees, her hands pressed against her ears. Thomas stumbled, and his transformation began to reverse, leaving him caught between human and wolf forms. May's face twisted in pain. But something different was happening to me. The sound didn't hurt. It made me angry. Angrier than I'd ever been in my life. I felt my body changing, but not like the others. Their transformations were controlled, deliberate. Mine was raw and instinctive. My bones stretched and reformed. My muscles bulged with new strength. My senses exploded outward until I could hear every heartbeat. And in the cave, smell every drop of fear sweat, feel every vibration through the stone floor. When the change was complete, I was no longer entirely human. But I wasn't entirely wolf either. I was something new, something that had never existed before. The sonic weapon stopped hurting and started sounding like music. "Impossible," I heard Rebecca whisper from somewhere near the cave entrance. "The readings are off the charts." I looked at the agents surrounding us, really looked at them. And for the first time, I understood what May had been trying to tell me. These weren't just government employees doing their jobs. They were terrified. Terrified of us. Terrified of what we represented. Terrified of a world where they weren't the apex predators. "You want to know what we are?" I said, and my voice carried through the cave like thunder. "We're what humans were before they forgot how to listen to the earth. We're what you gave up when you chose cities over forests." "Sam, please." Rebecca's voice was shaking now. "You're not thinking clearly. The transformation affects the mind. You're not yourself." I laughed, and the sound made several agents step backward. "I'm more myself than I've ever been." But even as I said it, I could feel something wrong. The change wasn't stopping. My vision was getting too sharp, too alien. My thoughts were becoming more animal than human. The part of me that was still Sam Blackthorne was getting smaller and smaller. May must have seen it in my eyes. "Samuel," she said urgently, "you have to control it. Don't let the wolf eat the man." "I can't," I growled. "It's too strong." "Yes, you can." She moved closer, despite the agents all around us. "Your grandmother taught you how. Think back. Remember the stories she told you. Remember what she said about balance." Suddenly I could hear my grandmother's voice as clearly as if she were standing beside me. "Some bloodlines carry more than just genetics, Samuel. They carry responsibility. The wolf protects, but the man decides what needs protecting." I closed my eyes and reached for that human part of myself, the part that loved these mountains not just as territory to defend, but as a home worth preserving. The part that became a park ranger not to hunt, but to serve. Slowly, carefully, I pulled the change back under control. Not all the way back to human. I was too far gone for that. But to something balanced. Something that could think as well as fight. When I opened my eyes, Rebecca was standing at the edge of the chamber. She wasn't wearing tactical gear like the agents. She looked like the academic I'd always known, except for the fear in her eyes. "How long have you been working with them?" I asked. 3 years, she said quietly. "Since they first approached me about the Melungeon research. They told me you were dangerous. That families like yours were a threat to normal humans. And you believed them?" "I wanted to believe them." She looked around at the disabled agents. at May and the children in their transformed states, at me standing in the middle of it all like something out of a fever dream. Because the alternative was admitting that everything I thought I knew about the world was wrong. The world is bigger than you thought, Rebecca. That doesn't make it more dangerous. But even as I said it, I knew she was past listening. The fear had taken root too deep. She pulled out a radio. "This is Dr. Montrose. The primary subject has undergone complete transformation. Recommend immediate escalation to Protocol 7. Protocol 7. I didn't know what that meant, but May's reaction told me everything I needed to know. Her face went white with terror. "They're going to destroy the whole mountain," she whispered. "Everyone on it." Through my enhanced hearing, I caught the radio response. "Protocol 7 authorized. Evacuation of all personnel in 60 minutes. Airstrike to follow." They were going to bomb Cumberland and Gap rather than risk us escaping. "We have to get out of here," I said. "Now." But as we started moving toward the back of the cave, I heard something that made my heart stop. Children, crying. Human children, not transformed ones. "May," I said, "how many of your people are on this mountain?" Her face crumpled. "Dozens, Samuel. Whole families. And most of them don't know what's coming." I looked at the agents we'd disabled, at Rebecca standing there with her radio, at the cave entrance where more government forces were probably gathering. And I made the hardest decision of my life. "Then we stop running," I said, "and we start fighting back." What happened next isn't something I can fully explain, even now. When I made the decision to stop running and start fighting, something changed, not just in me, but in the mountain itself. I howled, not a human sound, but something that came from deep in my transformed throat. It echoed through the cave system, through the rock, through the earth itself. And from all across Cumberland Gap, I heard answering calls. They came from every direction. Melungeon families I'd never known existed, emerging from hidden homes and secret places throughout the mountain. Each one different, each one carrying their own version of the old bloodlines. Some were wolf-like, others more feline. Some seemed to shift between different animal forms entirely. May's eyes widened. I had no idea there were so many left. "Neither did they," I said, listening to the government radios crackling with panicked reports. "Motion detected in sectors 7 through 15. Unknown number of subjects converging on primary location." The agents still conscious in the cave looked terrified. Rebecca had backed against the wall, her radio clutched in shaking hands. "Samuel," she whispered, "what have you done?" "What I should have done years ago," I said. "Stopped hiding." The first of the other families reached our cave within minutes. An elderly man who moved like flowing water despite his age. A woman whose eyes held the deep patience of ancient oaks. Cheech. Children who ran on 4 legs as easily as 2. "Samuel Blackthorne," the old man said. "Sarah's grandson. We've been waiting a long time for you to wake up." "Who are you?" "I'm your great-uncle Marcus. And this," he gestured to the others flooding into the cave, "is your real family." Outside, I could hear helicopters approaching. The government's evacuation was beginning, but they were too late. We weren't trapped in the mountain anymore. We were the mountain. Working together, using abilities I was only beginning to understand, we disabled every piece of government equipment on Cumberland Gap. Their communications went dead. Their vehicles wouldn't start. Their weapons jammed or simply fell apart. But we didn't hurt anyone. Not seriously. That was important to me. To all of us. We weren't monsters, despite what they believed. By sunrise, the government forces had withdrawn completely. They left their equipment behind and fled on foot, carrying only their wounded and their fear. Rebecca was the last to leave. I found her sitting by the cave entrance, staring out at the morning mist like she was seeing the world for the first time. "I'm sorry," she said without looking at me. "I know. They told me you were dangerous, that people would get hurt." "People did get hurt," I said. but not the way they expected. She finally looked at me. I'd pulled my transformation back to mostly human, but I knew my eyes still held flecks of gold, and my face still carried subtle changes that marked me as something other. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you go back to your university. You write your reports. You tell them that the Melungeons are just old stories, mountain legends that got out of hand. And if I don't?" I let a little of the wolf show in my smile. "You will." After she left, May found me standing on Pinnacle Overlook, looking out over the valley that had always been my home. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Different. Like I'm seeing everything for the first time, but also like I'm remembering things I'd forgotten." I flexed my hands, watching the claws extend and retract at will. Like I'm finally who I was supposed to be. And scared? Terrified, I admitted. What if I can't control it? What if I hurt someone? May put her hand on my shoulder. "That's how we know you'll be fine, Samuel. The ones who should be afraid never are. The ones who should be trusted always doubt themselves." Over the following months, life in Cumberland Gap slowly returned to something like normal. Tourists came and went. Hikers walked the trails. Families camped under the stars. They never saw us, of course. We'd gotten very good at hiding over the generations, but we were there, watching, protecting, making sure the mountains stayed wild and free. I kept my job as a park ranger. It was perfect cover, and besides, I genuinely loved the work. But now I had help. Family members who could track poachers across impossible terrain, who could guide lost hikers to safety without ever being seen, who could keep the balance between the human world and the wild one. The government never came back in force. Oh, they sent the occasional researcher or investigator, but something always went wrong with their equipment. Their GPS units malfunctioned. Their radios picked up interference. Their vehicles broke down on mountain roads. After a while, they stopped coming altogether. Cumberland Gap became just another national park again, at least in the official reports. But late at night, when the moon is dark and the mist rises from the hollows, hikers sometimes report seeing people who aren't quite people walking the old trails, families with eyes that shine like stars and smiles that hold too many teeth. Most people dismiss these stories as imagination or folklore. Park Service officials, the ones who don't know the truth, chalk it up to tired minds and dim light. I just smile and file the reports away, because some bloodlines do carry more than genetics. They carry responsibility. My name is Dave Colborn, and I've been a park ranger for 12 years now. Before that, I spent 15 years down in the coal mines, just like my daddy did before the accident took him. When people ask me why I switched jobs, I tell them I wanted fresh air and sunshine. The truth is harder to explain. I worked the Paint Creek section of New River Gorge, about 50 miles from where I grew up. It's beautiful country, all rolling hills and thick forests, but underneath it all are the old mine shafts. They're like scars you can't see, tunnels and caverns that honeycomb the earth. Sometimes I wonder if the dead ever really leave a place like this. The bridge sits right over Paint Creek, about a quarter mile from the old mining camp. It's a railroad bridge, built in 1910, all black steel and rivets. Trains still use it twice a day, hauling coal cars from the mine that's still running up the valley. I check it every month for safety issues. Loose bolts, rusted metal, anything that might cause trouble. That's how I first heard it singing. It was a Tuesday morning in October, crisp and clear. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the hills in reds and golds. I was walking my usual route when I stopped dead in my tracks. There was music coming from the bridge, soft and low, like someone humming a sad song. At first I figured it was just wind through the metal. Old bridges make all kinds of noises. But as I got closer, the sound got clearer. It wasn't random noise from wind and steel. It was actual singing, with words I almost could make out. I walked right up to the bridge and put my hand on one of the support beams. The metal was vibrating, but not like it should when wind hits it. This felt different, like the whole structure was alive somehow. The singing got louder when I touched it, and I could swear I heard my name mixed in with the melody. Dave. Dave. P.S. Dave. I jerked my hand back like I'd been burned. The singing stopped immediately, leaving just the normal sounds of the forest, birds calling, wind in the trees, water flowing under the bridge. But I could feel something watching me, waiting. I'm not a man who scares easy. You don't last long in the mines if you jump at every sound. But standing there next to that bridge, with the silence pressing down on me, I felt afraid in a way I hadn't since I was a kid. I did what any sensible person would do. I called Maria Santos, the structural engineer who does safety inspections for the county. Maria's smart, practical, and she knows more about bridges than anyone I've ever met. If there was a logical explanation, she'd find it. Dave, you sound rattled, she said when I called her that afternoon. What's going on out there? I need you to check the Paint Creek Bridge, I told her. There's something wrong with it. Wrong how? Structural damage? I paused, trying to figure out how to explain without sounding crazy. It's making sounds it shouldn't make, musical sounds. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Maria laughed, but not in a mean way. Bridges do that sometimes, resonance from wind or train vibrations. I'll come take a look tomorrow. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that singing again. Soft, sad voices calling my name. I got up around midnight and made coffee, sitting at my kitchen table with all the lights on. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the windows. Around 2 a.m, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Maria's number. Dave? Her voice was shaky, scared. Are you awake? Yeah, what's wrong? I couldn't sleep, so I drove out to look at the bridge. Dave, there's something very wrong here. The bridge, it's singing. Real singing, with words. And the words... She paused, and I heard her take a deep breath. The words are names, Dave. People's names. My blood went cold. What kind of names? Old-fashioned ones, like from a long time ago. Thomas McGrady, William Fletcher, Henry Kowalski. Over and over again, like a list. I knew those names. Every person who grew up around here knew them. They were carved on the memorial stone in the town cemetery. 83 names from the mining disaster of 1912. The worst mining accident in West Virginia history. Maria, I said quietly, get away from that bridge. Right now. Dave, what aren't you telling me? I looked out my window toward the hills where the bridge sat, hidden in the darkness. Somewhere out there, the dead were singing their names into the night, and I had a terrible feeling they were trying to tell us something we needed to hear. Maria met me at the bridge the next morning, bringing enough equipment to wire a small building. She had sound recording devices, vibration sensors, and a computer that could analyze frequencies and patterns. If there was a scientific explanation for what we were hearing, she was going to find it. Show me exactly where you heard it, she said, all business now. In the daylight, with her tools and her logical mind, she seemed more like herself again. But I could see the worry in her eyes. We walked onto the bridge together, our footsteps echoing off the steel. It was quiet now, just the normal creaking and settling you'd expect from an old structure. Birds were singing in the trees below, and the creek bubbled over the rocks. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Maybe it only happens at night, Maria said, setting up her recording equipment on one of the support beams. That's when we heard the train coming. The 915 freight train runs the same route every day, hauling coal cars from the active mine up the valley. Usually, when it crosses the bridge, there's nothing but the rumble of wheels on track and the squeal of metal on metal. But this time was different. As the train approached, the bridge began to hum. Softly at first, then louder as time. The locomotive got closer. By the time the engine reached us, the whole structure was singing, and the melody was heartbreaking, a sad, slow song that seemed to rise up from the steel itself. Maria's equipment went crazy. The needles on her meters jumped and danced, and her computer screen filled with wave patterns that made no sense. She stared at the readings, shaking her head. "This is impossible," she said, raising her voice over the singing. "The frequency patterns are all wrong. Steel doesn't resonate like this, not in these harmonies." But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when the coal cars passed over us. As each car rolled by, the singing got clearer, and we could hear the names again. Thomas McGrady, William Fletcher, Henry Kowalski. All 83 names from the 1912 disaster, sung in voices that sounded tired and sad and angry. The train passed and the singing faded. Maria and I stood there in the silence, looking at each other. "Did you record that?" I asked. She nodded, rewinding the tape. When she played it back, all we heard was the normal sound of a train crossing a bridge. No singing, no names, nothing. "That's not possible," she whispered. I heard it. We both heard it. I knew Maria well enough to see she was scared now, really scared, and that made me more frightened than I wanted to admit. If Maria Santos, with all her engineering knowledge and scientific training, couldn't explain what we were experiencing, then we were dealing with something way outside the normal world. "Dave," she said quietly, "tell me about the mining disaster. The real story, not what they teach in school." I sat down on one of the bridge supports, feeling suddenly tired. My grandmother used to tell me about it. She was just a girl then, but she remembered. The mine owners knew the tunnels were dangerous. Too much gas buildup, not enough ventilation. The miners complained, but the company said everything was fine. They were pushing the men to dig deeper, work faster. More coal meant more money. What happened? Gas explosion on a Tuesday morning, just like today. 83 men went down that shaft, and only a handful made it out alive. Most of the bodies were never recovered. The tunnels collapsed, sealing them in forever. I looked down at the creek flowing beneath us. The company said it was an accident, but the families knew better. Those men died because someone chose profit over safety. Maria was quiet for a long time, staring at her equipment. Finally, she said, "Dave, what if the bridge isn't just making random sounds? What if it's trying to tell us something?" Before I could answer, we heard voices coming from the forest. A group of hikers emerged from the trail, laughing and talking. They walked onto the bridge without a care in the world, taking pictures and pointing at the scenery. The singing started again, soft but urgent. The hikers stopped talking and looked around, confused. "Did you hear that?" one of them asked. "Hear what?" another replied. But I could see they all heard it. The singing was getting louder, more insistent, and for the first time, I could make out words beyond the names. "Danger, danger, listen, please listen." The hikers hurried off the bridge, muttering to each other about strange echoes and wind effects. Maria and I stayed behind, watching them disappear into the forest. "They're trying to warn us," Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The miners who died in 1912. They're trying to warn us about something." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. "Warn us about what?" She pointed toward the active mine up the valley, where smoke was rising from the buildings and trucks moved back and forth like ants. What if it's happening again? What if the current mining operation is heading for the same kind of disaster? That afternoon, I made some phone calls to people I knew who worked at the mine. What I learned made my stomach turns. 1. The company was pushing the miners harder than ever, cutting corners on safety to meet increased production demands. There were complaints about gas levels, about inadequate ventilation, about equipment that needed repair. It was 1912 all over again. As the sun set over Paint Creek, Maria and I packed up her equipment. The bridge was quiet now, but I could feel the presence of those 83 dead miners, watching and waiting. They had tried to warn people 52 years ago, but no one had listened. Now they were trying again, using the only voice they had, the steel and stone of a bridge built over their graves. "We have to do something," Maria said as we walked back to our cars. I nodded, but I wasn't sure what we could do. Who would believe us? Who would listen to a story about singing bridges and voices of the dead? As if in answer to my thoughts, the bridge began to sing again, one last time. But now the song was different. Not sad and mournful, but determined. Strong. The voices of 83 miners who had died for someone else's greed, and who weren't going to let it happen again. "We'll find a way," I promised the darkness. "We'll make them listen." The next few days were the strangest of my life. Every time I got near the bridge, the singing started. It wasn't random anymore. The voices seemed to know I was listening, and they had things to tell me. Maria came back with different equipment, trying to document what we were experiencing. She brought cameras, more sensitive recording devices, even a device that measured electromagnetic fields. Nothing worked. The equipment either malfunctioned or recorded normal bridge sounds, but we could hear the singing clear as day. "It's like they only want certain people to hear them," Maria said on Thursday morning. We were sitting in my truck, parked where we could see the bridge. You, me, and maybe others who are willing to believe. "Or people who are connected somehow," I replied. "My father worked in mines his whole life. Your job involves bridges and safety. Maybe they chose us for a reason." As if summoned by our words, a figure appeared on the bridge. It was Jim Morrison, a miner from the current operation. I knew Jim from church. He was a good man with 3 kids and a wife who worried about him every day. He was walking slowly across the bridge, his lunch pail in one hand, his hard hat in the other. The singing started immediately, but this time it was urgent, almost frantic. Multiple voices calling Jim's name, trying to get his attention. Jim stopped in the middle of the bridge and looked around, confused. "Jim!" I called out, getting out of my truck. "Everything okay?" He turned toward me, his face pale. "Dave, you hear that too?" "Hear what?" "Voices. Sounds crazy, I know, but I swear I hear voices coming from this bridge. They're saying my name, telling me to be careful. Telling me..." He paused, shaking his head. "Telling me not to go to work today." Maria and I exchanged glances. The dead miners were trying to save Jim, trying to prevent him from walking into danger. "Maybe you should listen," I said carefully. "Maybe you should take the day off." Jim laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Can't afford to take days off, Dave. Company's been pushing us hard, and anyone who misses work without a good reason gets written up. 3 write-ups and you're gone." "What's happening at the mine, Jim? Any problems?" His expression darkened. "More than I like to think about. The new section we're working has gas issues, but the company says the equipment shows everything's fine. Ventilation system's been acting up, but they won't shut down to fix it properly. Just patch jobs and keep digging." The singing intensified, and now I could make out individual words mixed with the names. Danger, gas, explosion, get out, please get out. Jim heard it too. I could see it in his face, the fear and confusion of a practical man encountering something impossible. "Dave, what is this? What's happening?" I made a decision that would change everything. "Jim, can you meet us at Murphy's Diner after your shift? There are some things you need to know about this bridge, about the mine you're working in." He nodded slowly and continued across the bridge. As he disappeared into the forest, the singing faded to a whisper. That evening, Jim sat across from Maria and me in a corner booth at Murphy's Diner, nursing a cup of coffee and listening to the most unbelievable story anyone had ever told him. "You're saying the bridge is haunted," he said when I finished, "by the miners who died in 1912. "I'm saying the bridge is trying to warn people," I corrected. "Whatever you want to call the force behind it, the message is clear. The current mining operation is heading for disaster." Jim was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "You know what the scary part is? I believe you. Something's been feeling wrong at the mine for weeks now. The old-timers are nervous, and these guys have seen everything. Gas readings that don't make sense, equipment problems, and the company pushing us to ignore safety protocols." "What kind of safety protocols?" Maria asked. "Standard stuff, checking gas levels before blasting, proper ventilation procedures, taking time to shore up tunnels that look unstable. But the bosses keep saying we're behind quota, that we need to work faster." Jim's hands were shaking slightly as he picked up his coffee cup. "Yesterday, they wanted us to blast in a section that felt wrong. Too much gas in the air, not enough airflow. We complained, but they said the readings were acceptable." "Did you blast anyway?" I asked. "No. Tommy Peterson, our crew chief, refused. He's got 20 years in the mines, and he said he'd rather be fired than blown up, but they brought in another crew to do it." The 3 of us sat in Silhouette and thinking about what that meant. Another crew, probably younger and less experienced, willing to follow orders without question, just like in 1912. "Jim," Maria said, "how many men work the mine now?" "About 40 on each shift, 2 shifts a day." 80 men. Almost exactly the same number who had died 52 years earlier. I drove home that night with a heavy heart, knowing we were running out of time. The voices on the bridge were getting more urgent each day, and Jim's story confirmed our worst fears. The mine was a disaster waiting to happen, and the only warnings were coming from the dead. The next morning, I was awakened by my phone ringing. It was Jim, and he was calling from the bridge. "Dave, you need to get out here right now," he said, his voice tight with fear. "The bridge, it's different today. Louder. And the voices, they're not just singing names anymore, they're giving directions." I threw on my clothes and drove to the bridge as fast as I dared. Jim was standing in the middle of the span, his face white as paper. The singing was so loud now that I could hear it through my truck windows. "What kind of directions?" I asked as I joined him. "They're telling me where to find proof," Jim said. "Proof that the company knew the mine was dangerous and ignored it. They say there are documents hidden in the old mine office, papers that show they knew about the gas problems weeks ago." The voices were clearer now than they had ever been, speaking in harmony but with distinct personalities. I could hear my father's voice among them, and that nearly broke me. "Son," the familiar voice said, "the office building by the old mine entrance. Second floor, filing cabinet behind the desk. Company inspection reports from last month. They knew, Dave. They all knew." Maria arrived while the voices were still speaking. She heard the directions too, and when the singing finally faded, the 3 of us knew what we had to do. We had to break into the abandoned mine office and find the evidence that could save 80 lives. The old mine office stood about 2 miles from the bridge, a 2-story brick building that had been abandoned for years. It was on company property, which meant going there without permission was trespassing at best, breaking and entering at worst. But as we sat in my truck looking at the building in the gray dawn light, none of us cared about the legal risks. The voices said second floor, filing cabinet behind the desk, Jim repeated for the 3rd time. He was nervous, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Are you sure about this?" Maria asked. If we don't get caught, 80 men might die," I said. "The bridge voices haven't been wrong about anything yet." We parked behind the building where the truck couldn't be seen from the road. The front door was locked, but Jim found an unlocked window on the side. One by one, we climbed through into what had been the main office. The place was covered in dust and debris, with old mining charts still tacked to the walls and forgotten paperwork scattered on desks. It felt haunted, even in daylight, full of the ghosts of decisions made and safety ignored. The stairs creaked as we climbed to the 2nd floor. The office the voices had directed us to was at the end of the hall, and sure enough, there was a large filing cabinet sitting behind an old wooden desk. The cabinet was locked, but Jim had brought bolt cutters from his truck. The metal lock snapped easily, and the drawers slid open to reveal rows of file folders, some recent, others dating back decades. "Look for anything from the past 2 months," I said, pulling out folders and checking dates. Maria found it first. "Here," she said, her voice tense. "Mine safety inspections, September 1964. She opened the folder and began reading, her face growing pale. "What does it say?" Jim asked. "Gas levels in the new section are 3 times higher than acceptable limit," Maria read. "Ventilation system operating at 60% capacity due to equipment failures. Recommendation, immediate suspension of all blasting operations until repairs can be completed." She looked up at us. "This report is dated 3 weeks ago." Jim grabbed the folder and read for himself. "This is signed by the company's own safety inspector. They knew the mine was dangerous, and they kept us working anyway." I found another folder marked Equipment Repairs, Deferred. Inside were maintenance requests going back months, all marked with red stamps saying Delayed, Budget Constraints, or Postponed Pending Review. "They've been putting off safety repairs for almost a year," I said, feeling sick. "Ventilation pumps, gas monitoring equipment, structural supports, everything that keeps miners alive." But the worst discovery was in a folder marked Production Targets, Q4 1964. It contained memos from company executives demanding increased coal production to meet a lucrative new contract, along with instructions to minimize non-essential downtime for safety concerns. Non-essential downtime, Jim repeated, his voice bitter. That's what they call keeping us alive. We took photographs of everything, using Maria's camera to document the evidence. As we worked, I could hear a faint humming in the walls of the building, as if the voices were still with us, guiding our search. That's when we heard the vehicles approaching. Company trucks, Jim said, looking out the window. 3 of them, coming up the access road. We grabbed the most damaging documents and the camera, shoving everything into a bag. The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the empty building as we hurried down the stairs. "Back window," Maria whispered. "Same way we came in." But as we reached the first floor, we heard voices at the front door and the sound of keys jingling. We were trapped. That's when something extraordinary happened. The humming in the walls grew louder and the building itself seemed to come alive. Doors began slamming throughout the structure. Windows rattled in their frames, and a sound like rushing wind filled the hallways. "What the hell?" one of the company men shouted from outside. "Building's probably settling," another voice replied. "These old places make all kinds of noise." But the distraction gave us the chance we needed. While the company men stood outside debating whether to enter the building, we slipped out the back window and made it to my truck. As we drove away, I looked back at the old mine office. The windows were dark and silent now, but I knew the spirits of the dead miners had helped us escape. They wanted their story told, wanted the truth to come out before history repeated itself. That afternoon, we took our evidence to the county sheriff, the state mining authority, and the local newspaper. Most of them looked at us like we were crazy when we mentioned the bridge and the voices, but the documents spoke for themselves. By evening, state mining inspectors were on their way to shut down the mine, pending a full safety investigation. But the company wasn't giving up without a fight. Jim called me around 10 o'clock that night, his voice shaking with fear. "Dave, they came to my house. 3 men in suits, said they represented the mining company's lawyers. They offered me money to say I stole those documents, that you and Maria put me up to it." "What did you tell them?" "I told them to get off my property." "But Dave, they made threats. Said I might have trouble finding work anywhere in the state, that my family might not be safe." I felt a cold anger building in my chest. 52 years later, and the same people were making the same threats to keep their deadly secrets buried. "Jim, pack up your family and get out of town for a few days. Go stay with relatives somewhere far away. This is going to get ugly before it gets better." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those 83 miners who had died in 1912, how their warnings had been ignored, how their families had been silenced with threats and money. I thought about my father, who had spent his life breathing coal dust and living in fear of cave-ins and explosions. Around midnight, I drove out to the bridge. The singing started as soon as I stepped onto the steel span. But it was different now. Triumphant. Hopeful. The voices were celebrating, knowing that their message had finally been heard. "Thank you," I said to the darkness. "Thank you for not letting it happen again." The singing faded to a gentle hum, like a lullaby. For the first time since this all began, the bridge felt peaceful. But I knew our work wasn't finished yet. The state mining inspectors found everything we said they would, and more. Gas levels that could have triggered an explosion at any moment. Ventilation equipment held together with duct tape and prayer. Structural supports that were one shift away from collapse. The mine was shut down immediately, and 80 men went home alive that night instead of being buried under tons of rock and coal. The company fought the closure, bringing in lawyers and lobbyists, claiming the inspection was based on stolen documents and the testimony of unreliable witnesses. They tried to paint Jim as a disgruntled employee, Maria as an attention-seeking engineer, and me as a mentally unstable ex-miner with a grudge against the coal industry. But the evidence was too strong, and the story had caught the attention of reporters from newspapers and television stations across the country. The parallels to the 1912 disaster were too obvious to ignore, and public opinion turned heavily against the company. 6 months later, the mine reopened with new safety equipment, better ventilation, and a management team that actually listened when workers reported problems. Jim went back to work, but now he was part of a safety committee that had real power to shut down operations when conditions were dangerous. Maria became something of a celebrity in engineering circles, publishing papers about acoustic phenomena in steel structures and consulting on bridge safety projects around the world. She never talked publicly about the voices she heard, but I know she still visits the bridge sometimes just to listen. As for me, I kept working as a ranger, but with a new understanding of my role. I wasn't just protecting the forest and the wildlife. I was guarding the memory of those who came before, making sure their stories weren't forgotten. The bridge still sings, but quietly now. Peaceful songs instead of urgent warnings. Sometimes hikers ask me about the strange echoes they hear when trains pass over, and I tell them it's just the wind and the steel, nothing more. But late at night, when I'm alone on the bridge, I can hear the individual voices in the chorus. My father is there, along with Thomas McGrady and William Fletcher and Henry Kowalski and all the rest. They're not angry anymore, not desperate to be heard. They're content, knowing they saved the lives they couldn't save in 1912. The company eventually sold the mining operation to a firm with a better safety record, and the old mine office was torn down. But before the demolition began, I went back one last time to walk through the empty rooms where we'd found the evidence that changed everything. The building was silent, but I felt their presence anyway. The spirits of men who had died for someone else's profit, who had found a way to reach across 50 years and prevent the same tragedy from happening again. People sometimes ask me if I really believe the bridge is haunted, if I truly think the voices of dead miners guided us to the evidence we needed. I usually just smile and change the subject. The truth is, it doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is that 80 men are alive today who might not have been, and their families sleep peacefully, knowing their husbands and fathers are coming home safe. The bridge over Paint Creek stands as it always has, carrying trains and memories across the flowing water. But now it carries something else too. Proof that the dead don't always rest quietly, that sometimes they find ways to protect the living, and that the most important voices are often the ones only certain people can hear. On quiet nights, when the wind is right and the moon is dark, you can still hear them singing. Songs of warning turn to songs of peace, voices of the dead who found a way to save the living, and the eternal promise that those who came before will never stop watching over those who come after. The bridge remembers, and so do I. My name is Patricia Foxworth, but everyone calls me Patty. I've been a park ranger for 8 years now, and I'm the first woman to get this job in our district. People said I couldn't handle it. They said the mountains were too dangerous for a lady. Well, I proved them wrong. I know these mountains better than most men who've lived here their whole lives. I studied birds in college, and I can tell you the call of every species in the Great Smoky Mountains. At night, when other rangers stay in their warm cabins, I'm out there tracking animals and watching over campers. The darkness doesn't scare me. At least, it didn't used to. It was late September 1967 when everything changed. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the mountainsides in reds and yellows. I was working the night shift near Cataract Falls, a remote area where most tourists don't go. The Cherokee used to bury their dead up there long before we turned it into a park. That morning around sunrise, a family came running into our station. They looked like they'd seen a ghost. The father, a big man with hands like tree trunks, was shaking. "We had to leave," he kept saying. "We couldn't stay another minute up there." His wife held their 2 kids close. The children hadn't said a word since they arrived. "What happened?" I asked, pouring them coffee from our old pot. "The birds," the woman whispered. "All night long they wouldn't stop. But it wasn't normal bird sounds. It was like they were trying to talk." I'd heard stranger stories from campers. People get spooked in the woods at night. Every owl hoot becomes a monster. Every branch snap becomes a stalker. "Whippoorwills can be loud," I told them. "They sing all night during mating season." The man looked at me with wide eyes. "Lady, I've been camping for 20 years. I know what birds sound like. These weren't just making noise. They were. He's saying words. Real words. His wife nodded. They kept calling out names. First random names, then... She looked at her husband. Then they started calling our names, he finished. Mine, hers, even our kids' names. How could birds know our names? I wrote it down in my report like always, but something about the way they told the story made my skin crawl. These weren't the kind of people who made things up. They had expensive camping gear and knew what they were doing in the woods. My supervisor, Harold Vance, read my report and shook his head. Harold was 55 and had been a ranger since before I was born. He'd seen everything these mountains could throw at you. Probably just the wind playing tricks, he said. You know how sound carries up there near the falls. But Harold looked worried. He kept glancing at the report. I think we should check it out, I said. Make sure there's nothing dangerous up there. Harold was quiet for a long time. Finally, he sighed. You're probably right. But we go together. That area gives me the creeps even in daylight. We packed our gear and headed up the mountain that afternoon. The trail to Cataract Falls winds through thick forest, past old Cherokee sites that most people don't know about. I'd been up there dozens of times, but something felt different today. The woods were too quiet. Usually you hear squirrels chattering, birds singing, insects buzzing. But as we climbed higher, all those sounds faded away. Even our footsteps seemed too loud. You notice how quiet it is? Harold asked. I nodded. In all my years in these mountains, I'd never heard such complete silence. It was like every living thing had packed up and left. We reached the campsite just before sunset. The family had left their fire pit full of cold ashes and trash scattered around like they'd run away fast. I picked up a can of beans that was still full. They left in a hurry, I said. Harold was examining the trees around the campsite. Patty, come look at this. I walked over to where he stood. On the bark of every tree, at about eye level, were tiny scratches. Lots of them, like something with small claws had been digging into the wood. Bird claws, Harold said. But I've never seen anything like this. It's like hundreds of birds were trying to claw their way through the bark. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky deep orange. That's when we heard it. Whip poor Will. Whip poor Will. But it wasn't coming from just one bird. It sounded like dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all calling at the same time. And they were close, very close. Harold and I looked at each other. Whippoorwills don't usually start calling until it's completely dark, and they certainly don't gather in big groups. Whip poor Will. Whip poor Will. The calls were getting louder, coming from every direction. I pulled out my flashlight and swept it across the trees. In the beam of light, I saw them. Eyes, hundreds of glowing eyes, staring down at us from every branch, every bush, every shadow. Small, dark shapes with bright eyes that reflected the light like tiny mirrors. Jesus Christ, Harold whispered. The whippoorwills had surrounded us. Whip poor Will, whip poor Will. But as I listened closer, standing there in that circle of glowing eyes, I realized the family had been right. The birds weren't just making their normal calls. There were words mixed in, real human words. Harold, Harold, Harold. My partner grabbed my arm. Did you hear that? Did they just say my name? I wanted to tell him no, that he was imagining things, but I'd heard it too. Clear as day, mixed in with the bird calls, someone had said, Harold. Patricia, Patricia, Patricia. Now they were calling my name, my full name, not the nickname everyone used. The sound came from all around us, like the trees themselves were speaking. This isn't possible, I said, but my voice came out as a whisper. Harold was already backing toward our truck. We need to leave, right now. But as we turned to go, the bird calls changed. They got louder and more urgent, like they were angry we were trying to leave, and the voices became clearer. Stay, stay, stay. Listen, Listen, listen. Help us, help us, help us. I stopped walking. Those last words hit me like a punch in the stomach. Harold, did you hear what they said? I heard them. Let's go. But I couldn't move. My whole life I'd studied birds. I knew their behavior, their sounds, their habits. This was impossible. Birds don't talk. They don't know human names. They don't ask for help. Patricia, come closer. Come closer. The voice was different now, softer, sadder. It sounded like an old man speaking through the bird calls. Someone's playing a trick on us, Harold said. Someone's got speakers hidden in the trees. I wanted to believe that. But as I shined my flashlight around, I could see the birds clearly now. Their beaks were moving with the sounds. The voices were really coming from them. We set up camp anyway. Harold thought we should leave, but I convinced him to stay one night. As a scientist, I had to understand what was happening. This could change everything we knew about animal behavior. We built a fire and made dinner, but neither of us felt like eating. The whippoorwills never stopped calling. As darkness fell completely, their voices got clearer and clearer. You built on our bones. You built on our bones. Sacred ground. Sacred ground. They destroyed our rest. They destroyed our rest. Someone's buried up here, I said. That's what they're trying to tell us. Harold poked at the fire with a stick. Even if that's true, and I'm not saying it is, how would birds know about it? How would they care? I'd been thinking about that. The Cherokee have stories about whippoorwills. They believe the birds carry souls to the afterlife. What if nothing? Harold cut me off. You're a scientist, Patty. You don't believe in ghost stories. But as the night wore on, it got harder to explain what we were seeing and hearing. The birds never left their perches. They never stopped calling, and their voices kept getting more human. Around midnight, Harold was getting tired. He'd been nodding off by the fire. Harold, come here. Come here. His eyes snapped open. Did you hear that? Harold, come to the trees. Come to the trees. He stood up slowly, like he was in a trance. Harold, don't, I said, but he was already walking toward the edge of our campsite. Come closer, closer. We need to tell you something. Harold, stop. I grabbed his arm. He blinked and looked at me confused. What? What happened? You were walking toward the trees. The birds were calling your name. He shook his head hard like he was trying to clear it. I don't remember that. I felt like I needed to go somewhere. We decided to take turns staying awake. Harold took the first watch while I tried to sleep in my tent. But sleep was impossible. The bird voices never stopped, and now they were saying things that made my blood turn cold. The machines came. The machines came. Dug up our children. Dug up our children. Scattered our bones. Scattered our bones. No rest, no peace. No rest, no peace. I sat up in my sleeping bag. Machines? What machines? This area had been protected parkland for decades. No construction was allowed up here. But then I remembered something. Last month, there had been survey crews up here. They said they were checking the trails, but I'd seen tire tracks from heavy equipment in areas where no trucks should be able to go. Patricia, you understand. You understand. The voice was right outside my tent now. So clear it could have been a person standing there. You study us. You know us. Help us. I unzipped my tent and crawled out. The fire had burned low, and Harold was sitting very still in his chair, staring into the darkness. Harold? He didn't answer. His yes were open, but he looked like he was somewhere else. Harold, come to the trees. Come to the trees. This time I watched him stand up and start walking. It was like he couldn't help himself. Harold, I shouted. The spell broke, and he stopped. Patty? What's wrong? You were doing it again, walking toward the trees when they called your name. He looked scared now, really scared. I don't remember. It's like I'm dreaming when I'm awake. We stayed close together for the rest of the night, neither of us sleeping. The birds kept calling, their voices mixing human words with their natural sounds until it became like some horrible song. When dawn finally came, the calling stopped all at once. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise had been. Harold and I packed up fast. We needed to get back to the station and figure out what to do. But as we loaded our gear, I found something that made my hands shake. Under a pile of leaves near our campsite was a piece of rusted metal. It looked like part of a bulldozer blade, and underneath it something white was sticking out of the ground. I brushed away the dirt and leaves. It was a bone, a human bone. We called the sheriff and the Cherokee Tribal Council from our station. Within hours, the campsite was crawling with people. Sheriff Morrison brought his deputy and the coroner. Joseph Walkingstick came as the Cherokee representative. Joseph was about 60, with long gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. He'd worked with the Park Service before on cultural issues. He knew these mountains as well as anyone alive. When he saw the bone we'd found, his face went very serious. "This is bad," he said quietly. "Very bad." The coroner confirmed what we already knew. It was a human bone, old but not ancient. Maybe 100 years, he guessed. And there were more bones scattered around the area. "Someone dug this up recently," the coroner told Sheriff Morrison. "See how the dirt's been disturbed? This grave was opened within the last few months." Joseph knelt down and touched the ground gently. "This is a burial site. Cherokee. My great-grandfather told me stories about this place. Families brought their dead here for generations." "But that was before the park existed," Sheriff Morrison said. "This land has been protected for 40 years. Protected by law," Joseph said, "but not protected from men who don't respect the law." I showed him the piece of bulldozer blade we'd found. Joseph's eyes got angry. "Someone's been digging up here. Heavy equipment. They disturbed the dead and scattered their bones." That's when I told them about the whippoorwills and their voices. Sheriff Morrison looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but Joseph nodded slowly. "The birds carry messages from the dead," he said. "When graves are disturbed, when the dead can't rest, the whippoorwills become their voice." "You can't be serious," Sheriff Morrison said. "You didn't hear them," I told the sheriff. "They were talking. Real words. They told us about machines digging up bones." Joseph looked at me with new respect. "You listened to them. Good. They chose you to carry their message to the living world." We spent the day searching the area. The more we looked, the worse it got. Bones were scattered everywhere, mixed with chunks of concrete and pieces of construction equipment. Someone had been building something up here, something big. But who and why? Harold and I volunteered to stay another night. The sheriff and coroner left at sunset, but Joseph stayed with us. "You shouldn't be up here after dark," he warned. "The spirits are angry, very angry." "We need to understand what's happening," I said. Joseph shook his head. "You don't understand. When Cherokee spirits are disturbed like this, they don't just talk. They can do things, dangerous things." But we stayed anyway. I had to know the truth about what was happening in these mountains. As soon as the sun went down, the whippoorwills came back. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They covered every tree, every bush, every rock. Their eyes glowed in our firelight like stars. "Patricia, Patricia, you came back. You came back." Joseph heard the voice too. His face went pale. "They're speaking English. I've never heard that before." "Joseph, Joseph, you remember the old ways. The old ways." Joseph answered them in Cherokee. I don't speak the language, but his voice was respectful, like he was talking to elders. The birds answered back, but now they were making Cherokee sounds mixed with English words. Joseph translated for us. "They say their bones have been scattered by machines. They say white men came with papers, saying they owned this land. They built concrete foundations for buildings. Show them. Show them. Under the rocks. Under the rocks. The birds all turned to look in the same direction, toward a pile of rocks near the waterfall. Joseph, Harold, and I walked over with our flashlights. Under the rocks, we found more than bones. We found construction plans buried in a metal box. Plans for a resort hotel right here on the sacred burial ground. Smoky Mountain Resort and Casino, I read from the papers. Planned opening, summer 1968. There were permits, signed by Park Service officials I recognized. Men I worked with every day. The project was illegal, but someone had been paying officials to look the other way. They sold our bones. They sold our bones. For money. For money. No respect. No rest. No respect. No rest. Harold was looking at the plans with a sick expression. Patty, look at this. The main building was supposed to be built right over the burial ground. They were going to pour concrete directly over Cherokee graves. Joseph was angry now. Really angry. This is why the spirits can't rest. Their bones were scattered, their burial place destroyed, also rich men could build a casino. Make it right. Make it right. Stop the machines. Stop the machines. Or we will. Or we will. That last part sounded like a threat. The bird voices were getting louder and more urgent. Suddenly, Harold pointed at the trees. Look! The whippoorwills were moving. Not flying away, but organizing themselves. They formed lines on the branches like soldiers getting ready for battle. 3 days. 3 days. Stop the building. Stop the building. Or we take them, or we take them. Joseph grabbed my arm. We need to leave. Now. They're giving us 3 days to stop the construction, or they'll take matters into their own hands. What does that mean? I asked. It means people are going to die, Joseph said. But as we started to pack up, the whippoorwills moved closer. They landed on our equipment, our truck, even on our shoulders. Not attacking, but making sure we couldn't leave. Stay. Stay. You must see. You must see. The truth. The truth. One bird, bigger than the others, landed right in front of me. Its eyes weren't just reflecting light anymore. They were glowing from inside, like they had fire behind them. When it opened its beak to call, I heard a voice I'd never forget. An old man's voice, speaking perfect English. I am Chief Standing Bear. These are my people's bones, your people scattered. You will help us, or you will join us. Then the bird flew up to join the others, and I knew our lives had just changed forever. The next morning, I couldn't pretend this was just about birds anymore. Joseph explained what we were really dealing with. The whippoorwills aren't just carrying messages, he said. Cherokee spirits are living inside them now. When the graves were disturbed, the dead couldn't move on to the next world. They're trapped here, using the birds as bodies. How many spirits? Harold asked. Joseph looked around at all the scattered bones. Maybe 50 people were buried here, maybe more, and they're all angry. We had 2 days to stop the construction before the spirits took action themselves. But first, we had to figure out who was behind the illegal resort. I called the Park Service headquarters and asked to speak with Regional Director Williams. When I told him what we'd found, he got very quiet. Ranger Foxworth, he said finally, you need to forget about this. There are things happening above your pay grade. Sir, we found human remains that were disturbed by illegal construction. I have to report this. No, you don't. This is a matter of national security now. You're ordered to stay away from that area. He hung up on me. My own boss had just told me to ignore a crime scene. That's when I knew the corruption went all the way to the top. But I wasn't giving up. That afternoon, Joseph and I drove to the Cherokee tribal office. If the Park Service wouldn't help, maybe the Cherokee Nation would. Chief Robert Swimmer listened to our story without interrupting. When we finished, he was quiet for a long time. My grandfather used to tell me about that burial ground, he said finally. Important people were buried there, chiefs, medicine men, warriors. If their rest has been disturbed, the spirits are giving us one more day, Joseph said. After that, they'll handle it themselves. And that's bad? I asked. Chief Swimmer nodded. Cherokee war spirits don't mess around. If they decide someone needs to die, that person dies. We spent the rest of the day trying to find out who was really behind the resort. The construction company was just hired help. The real money came from somewhere else. That night, Harold, Joseph, and I went back to the burial ground. We had to try one more time to talk to the spirits, to get them to give us more time. The whippoorwills were waiting for us. More of them than ever before. They covered every surface like a living carpet. Time runs short. Time runs short. Tomorrow they come back. Tomorrow they come back. With more machines. With more me. Akines. I looked at Joseph. More construction equipment is coming tomorrow. He asked the birds in Cherokee. Their answer made his face go white. Not just equipment, he translated. Men with guns. They're going to finish the job tomorrow night, no matter what. We will be ready. We will be ready. Cherokee warriors never surrender, never surrender. The biggest bird landed in front of me again. When it spoke with Chief Standing Bear's voice, the sound cut right through me. Patricia Foxworth, you have proven yourself a friend to the Cherokee people. We will protect you, but the others must choose. What do you mean? I asked. Tomorrow, when the machines come, stay away. What happens to those who disturb our bones is not your concern. Harold grabbed my arm. Patty, we can't let people get killed, even if they're criminals. But Chief Standing Bear's voice came again, harder now. They showed no mercy to our bones. They scattered our children like garbage. Why should we show them mercy? It was a good question. These men had desecrated graves for money. They'd destroyed sacred sites and bribed officials. Maybe they deserved whatever the spirits had planned. But I was still a park ranger. Protecting people was my job, even people I didn't like. We will not hurt innocents, the voice said, like he could read my thoughts. Only those who profit from disturbing the dead. Joseph was talking to the birds in Cherokee, asking questions. When he turned back to us, he looked scared. They're not just going to attack the construction crew, he said. They're going after everyone involved in the resort project. The executives, the officials who took bribes, everyone. How can birds kill people? Harold asked. Joseph pointed to the thousands of whippoorwills surrounding us. These aren't just birds anymore. They're Cherokee warriors. They know how to fight. As if to prove his point, the birds all took flight at once. They moved like a single creature, forming shapes in the air. First a spear point, then a war party on horseback, then a tornado of wings and beaks and claws. The sound they made wasn't bird calls anymore. It was war cries. Cherokee war cries that echoed off the mountains like thunder. Tomorrow at sunset, Chief Standing Bear's voice said, justice comes. Then all at once the birds vanished into the darkness, leaving us alone by our dying fire. We had less than 24 hours to decide whose side we were on. The next day went by too fast. Harold and I tried calling the FBI, the state police, even the governor's office. Nobody wanted to hear about illegal construction on Cherokee burial grounds. You're wasting your time, Regional Director Williams told me when he called back. This project has approval from Washington. Anyone who interferes will lose their job. But I didn't care about my job anymore. Those spirits had trusted me with their story. I wasn't going to let them down. As the sun started to set, construction trucks began arriving at the burial ground. Big machines, bulldozers, cement mixers, excavators. And just like Joseph had predicted, men with guns, private security guards, armed with rifles. They were planning to work through the night and finish the foundation by morning. Harold, Joseph, and I watched from a ridge above the site. We could see the workers setting up lights and starting their equipment. Last chance to leave, Joseph said. I shook my head. I need to see this. That's when the whippoorwills came. At first, it was just a few birds flying over the construction site. The workers barely noticed them, but more kept coming. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. They filled the sky like a dark cloud, blocking out the stars. Their calls echoed off the mountains, getting louder and louder until it sounded like an army marching. The construction workers stopped what they were doing. Even the security guards lowered their rifles to stare up at the incredible sight. You disturbed, bet our bones. You scattered our children. The voice of Chief Standing Bear came from every bird at once, like a 1,000-person choir speaking in unison. Now you face the justice of the Isha-Sunbean, dead. What the hell is that? One of the workers shouted. The foreman, a big man in a hard hat, laughed. It's just birds, you idiots. Get back to work. But when he started up his bulldozer, the whippoorwills attacked. They came down like a waterfall of wings and claws. Not randomly, but with purpose. They went straight for the men who were operating the heavy equipment, the ones who were actively disturbing the burial ground. The foreman screamed as hundreds of small claws tore at his clothes and hands. He fell off his bulldozer and ran for the trees, blood streaming from dozens of cuts. Other workers tried to fight back with shovels and clubs, but you can't fight a tornado. The birds swarmed over them, and within minutes, every piece of construction equipment was abandoned. But the spirits weren't done. 3 black cars had been parked at the edge of the site. Expensive cars that probably belonged to the executives behind the resort project. The whippoorwills surrounded the cars, landing on them so thick that the metal disappeared under a carpet of dark feathers. Come out, Chief Standing Bear's voice commanded. Face what you have done. The car doors opened slowly. 3 men in expensive suits stepped out, looking terrified. I recognized one of them, Regional Director Williams, my boss. You sold sacred ground for money, the voice accused. You scattered the bones of children for profit. Williams tried to speak, but no words came out. The other 2 men were backing toward the forest, but the whippoorwills cut off their escape. You will restore what you destroyed, the voice continued. You will return our bones to their proper rest. You will make this place sacred again. How? Williams finally managed to ask. Stop the casino. Protect this land forever. Make it a place where the Cherokee dead can rest in peace. One of the other executives, a fat man with gold jewelry, found his voice. Do you know how much money we've invested in this project? Millions of dollars. The whippoorwills went silent, completely silent. Even the night insects stopped chirping. Then Chief Standing Bear's voice came again, but this time it was cold as winter wind. Cherokee children's bones are not worth your money. The birds rose into the air again, forming that tornado shape, but this time, instead of just attacking, they began to sing. Not bird calls, but human voices singing a Cherokee death song. The fat executive clutched his chest and fell to his knees. His face was turning blue. Stop, Williams begged. Please, we'll do whatever you want. Too late for him, the voice said. He chose money over respect for the dead. The executive collapsed completely. By the time Joseph and I reached him, he was dead. Heart attack, it looked like. The other 2 executives and all the construction workers were running down the mountain road as fast as they could. The security guards had abandoned their rifles and were right behind them. Only Williams was left, standing alone in the middle of the scattered bones and construction equipment. You have one choice, Chief Standing Bear's voice told him. Make this right or join your friend. Williams nodded quickly. I'll stop the project. I'll make sure this land is protected. Please just don't kill me. You will do more than that. You will help us find all our scattered bones. You will give them proper burial. You will make sure no one ever disturbs this place again. Yes, Williams whispered. Whatever you want. The whippoorwills began to disperse, flying back into the darkness. But Chief Standing Bear's voice came one more time. Patricia Foxworth. I stepped forward, even though my knees were shaking. You listened when others would not. You respected what others ignored. The Cherokee people will remember. The last of the birds flew away, and suddenly the mountain was quiet again. Williams kept his promise. The resort project was canceled. The land around the burial ground was declared a protected cultural site. All the bones we could find were given proper Cherokee burial ceremonies. I got promoted to head of cultural preservation for the Park Service. My job now is to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. Joseph and I still visit the burial ground sometimes. It's peaceful now. The whippoorwills call at night, but they sound like normal birds again. The spirits have found their rest. But sometimes on very quiet nights, I still hear Chief Standing Bear's voice carried on the wind. Listen to the birds, Patricia. They remember what people choose to forget. And I always listen, because some things are more important than jobs or money or what other people think is possible. Some things are sacred, and the dead don't forget when you disturb their rest. The whippoorwills make sure of that. My name is Marcus Ashford, and I've been a park ranger for 17 years. I tell you that so you know I'm not some city boy who jumps at shadows. I was born in these mountains, just like my daddy and his daddy before him. The Blue Ridge has been in my blood since before I could walk. When folks hear about what happened up on Devil's Backbone that October, they shake their heads and talk about stress, say the divorce messed with my head. Maybe they're right about some things, but not about what I saw in that hollow, not about what's still up there, waiting. It was 1972, and I'd just taken on the backcountry assignment. Wanted to be alone for a while, you understand. The papers were signed, the house was sold, and I figured the mountains would help me think straight. I'd grown up hearing the old stories, mountain witches and such, but I always figured they were just tales about isolated folks using herbs and home remedies. Nothing a rational man needed to worry about. The call came in on a Tuesday morning, crackling through the radio like a wounded animal. 3-day weekend camping trip, the Rutherford family from Richmond. Grandparents, parents, 2 kids. They were supposed to check in Monday evening. Now it was Tuesday, and nobody had heard from them. I grabbed Timothy Fletcher, a young ranger who'd been with us about 2 years, and Miller, an old-timer who knew these mountains better than most. Miller had volunteered with search and rescue for decades, and his knowledge of the backcountry was better than any map. Devil's Backbone Ridge, I told them, checking my gear. About 15 miles from the nearest road, they registered for campsite 12, up near the old Cherokee hunting grounds. Fletcher nodded, eager as always. Miller just spat into the dirt and shook his head. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Nothing wrong with the search," Miller said, loading fresh batam rees into his flashlight. "Just don't like that area much. Never have." The hike took us 4 hours, following old deer trails that twisted through oak and pine. The forest felt normal at first. Birds singing, squirrels chattering, the usual mountain sounds that had been my soundtrack since childhood. But as we climbed higher, something started feeling off. The silence hit us about a mile from the campsite. Complete, dead quiet, like someone had thrown a blanket over the whole mountain. No bird songs, no insects buzzing. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "That's strange," Fletcher whispered, though I couldn't say why we were whispering. Miller had stopped walking entirely. He stood frozen on the trail, head tilted like he was listening to something we couldn't hear. "We should keep moving," I said, but my voice sounded strange in the quiet. We found the campsite exactly where it should be, tucked into a clearing surrounded by old-growth trees. But finding it and understanding it were 2 different things entirely. The camp looked like the family had just stepped away for a minute. Tent zipped up neat, camp chairs arranged around a fire that was still warm. Food sat on the picnic table like they'd been interrupted mid-meal. Sandwiches half-eaten, thermos still steaming with coffee. But no Rutherfords, no voices calling from the woods, no sign they'd ever left the clearing. "Check the tent," I told Fletcher while I examined the fire pit. The coals were still glowing red underneath the ash. Whatever happened, it had happened recent. Fletcher came back from the tent looking pale. "Sleeping bags are still laid out, personal items all there, even found the little girl's teddy bear tucked in like she was coming back to bed." Miller was walking the edge of the clearing, studying the ground with the intensity of a hound dog. He'd been quiet since we arrived, but now he looked downright spooked. "Marcus," he called, "you need to see this." I walked over to where he stood at the tree line. Carved into the bark of an old oak about chest high were symbols I'd never seen before. Not letters or numbers, but shapes that seemed to twist when you looked at them too long. They'd been cut deep, and the sap had dried black around the edges. "What do you think they mean?" Fletcher asked, reaching out to touch one. "Don't!" Miller grabbed his hand. "Don't touch them!" That's when our compass started acting up. The needle spun like a top, never settling on any direction. My radio crackled with static, and underneath the white noise I could swear I heard whispers. Soft voices speaking words I couldn't quite catch. Fletcher tried his radio and got the same thing. Static and whispers, like the mountain itself was trying to tell us something we didn't want to hear. The fog rolled in without warning. 1 minute we could see clear across the ridge, the next we were wrapped in gray so thick I could barely see Fletcher standing 3 feet away. It wasn't natural fog, it moved too fast, and it felt wrong against the skin, cold and damp in a way that went straight to your bones. "Stay close," I called, though my voice seemed to disappear into the gray without traveling far. We decided to search the area around the campsite, looking for any trail the family might have taken. Miller found the first clue about 50 yards into the woods. A child's sneaker hanging from a low branch like someone had placed it there on purpose. "This belonged to the Rutherford girl?" Fletcher asked. I checked the description from their registration. Size matches, but how does a shoe end up in a tree? We found the second shoe 20 yards further, sitting upright on a fallen log. Then the boys' sneakers, arranged in a perfect circle around the base of a huge pine tree. Inside the circle, the ground was bare. No leaves, no grass, nothing but dark earth that looked like it had been swept clean. "This is getting weird," Fletcher muttered, but his voice carried a shake that told me he was thinking stronger words. Miller knelt beside the circle, studying the arrangement without stepping inside. "My grandmother used to tell stories," he said quietly, "about the old women who lived deep in these mountains. Said they were keepers of something ancient, something that didn't like strangers poking around where they didn't belong." "You talking about mountain witches?" I asked. "Come on, Miller. You know better than that." "Do I?" He stood up, brushing dirt from his knees. "I know these mountains have been home to Cherokee for 1,000 years before we showed up. I know there are hollows on no map, places where the old ways never died. And I know my grandmother never lied to me about what to stay away from." The fog was getting thicker, and our flashlights barely cut through the gray. Even with fresh batteries, the beams seemed weak and yellow, like the mountain was drinking up the light. That's when we found the clothing. A trail of torn fabric led deeper into the woods. A piece of flannel shirt here, a strip of jeans there. But the tiers were wrong. Too clean, like the clothes had been carefully cut rather than ripped by branches or thorns. Fletcher was getting more nervous with each step. He kept looking over his shoulder and jumping at sounds that weren't there. "Maybe we should head back to the campsite," he suggested. "Wait for the fog to clear." But I was in full ranger mode now, following training that said you don't give up on missing people, especially not kids. The trail of clothing was leading us somewhere, and I intended to find out where. The hollow opened up in front of us like a mouth. It was a deep depression in the mountainside, older than anything else around it. The trees that grew down its sides were massive, oaks and chestnuts that must have been here when the Cherokee were the only people walking these ridges. The fog seemed to pour into the hollow like water, pooling at the bottom where we could see the faint outline of a structure. A cabin, smoke rising from its chimney. "There," I pointed. "Someone's home." But Miller was backing away from the edge. "We shouldn't go down there." "Why not? If someone's living there, maybe they saw the family, maybe they can help." My grandmother told me about places like this, hollows that don't show up on surveys, that stay hidden unless they want to be found. She said there are things living in these mountains that are older than the Cherokee, older than the trees themselves. Fletcher was nodding along, and that made me angry. We were park rangers, not children scared of bedtime stories. "I'm going down," I decided. "You two can wait here if you want." I started down the steep side of the hollow, using roots and rocks for handholds. The fog was thicker here, and the temperature dropped at least 10 degrees. My breath came out in white puffs, and frost was forming on the dead leaves under my feet. The cabin sat in a clearing at the bottom, maybe 100 years old, but in perfect condition. Light glowed in the windows, and smoke drifted up from the stone chimney. It looked like something from a fairy tale, the kind of place where good things happen to lost children. But as I got closer, the wrongness started creeping in. The windows were too dark, like they were covered from inside with something thicker than curtains. The smoke from the chimney didn't smell like wood. It was sweet and thick, like burning herbs mixed with something else I couldn't identify. And then I saw her. Just for a second, a face in the window, ancient and pale with eyes that seemed to catch the light like an animal's. She was watching me, and even through the fog and distance, I could feel the weight of that stare. I called up to Fletcher and Miller, but when I turned back to the window, she was gone. That's when Fletcher started screaming. His voice cut through the fog like a knife, high and terrified and wrong. I scrambled back up the sides of the hollow, slipping on wet leaves and scraping my hands on rocks. I found Miller at the top, alone and shaking. Fletcher was nowhere to be seen. "Where is he?" I grabbed Miller's shoulders. "Where's Fletcher?" Miller pointed toward the woods with a hand that wouldn't stop trembling. "Something took him. I heard him walking around the edge, and then he started screaming. I called for him, but—" He swallowed hard. I heard his voice coming from 3 different directions at once, like something was playing with the sound, bouncing it around the trees. We searched for an hour, calling Fletcher's name until our throats were raw, but the fog seemed to swallow our voices, and the forest stayed silent as a grave. When we finally found him, I wished we hadn't. Fletcher was sitting against a tree about 200 yards from the hollow, his eyes open and staring at nothing. He was alive, breathing, pulse steady, but he wouldn't respond when we called his name. His lips moved constantly, but no sound came out. When I knelt down and put my ear close to his mouth, I could barely make out the words he kept repeating. "She knows the old ways. She knows the old ways. She knows the old ways." Miller helped me get Fletcher to his feet, but he moved like a sleepwalker, letting us guide him but showing no awareness of where he was or what had happened. His skin was cold as winter despite the mild October weather. "We need to get him out of here," Miller said, but his voice carried no conviction. We both knew Fletcher wasn't going anywhere in his condition, and we couldn't carry him 15 miles back to the road. The fog was starting to thin as evening approached, but instead of feeling relief, I felt more exposed. Like whatever lived in that hollow had been using the gray cover to move around, and now it didn't need to hide anymore. That's when I noticed our equipment was going haywire. My watch, which had been keeping perfect time for 5 years, was running backward. The hands moved slowly but steadily, counterclockwise, like time itself was unwinding. Fletcher's watch showed the same thing, and Miller's had stopped entirely at 3:33. Our flashlights were dimming despite fresh batteries I'd put in that morning. The beams grew weaker with each passing minute, turning from bright white to sickly yellow to barely visible orange. But worst of all were the sounds. As darkness fell, the forest came alive with noises that didn't belong. Footsteps that circled our campsite but never came close enough to see. Voices calling our names from different directions, sometimes sounding like Fletcher, sometimes like people we'd never met. And underneath it all, a sound like singing. Old words in a language I didn't recognize, rising and falling like a lullaby, sung by something that had never been human. Miller had his rifle out, though what good bullets would do against whatever we were facing I couldn't say. He'd barely spoken since we found Fletcher, just sat with his back against a tree and watched the darkness with the intensity of a man expecting death. "Tell me what your grandmother said," I finally asked him. "About these hollows." Miller was quiet for so long I thought he hadn't heard. Then he started talking, his voice barely above a whisper. She called them the Granny Witches. Said they weren't evil exactly, but they weren't human either. They'd been in these mountains since before the Cherokee, keeping watch over things that should stay hidden. Most times they left people alone, but if you went where you shouldn't go, took things you shouldn't take. He shrugged. They had ways of dealing with trespassers. You think one of these witches took the Rutherford family? I think we walked into something we don't understand, and I think it's not done with us yet." As if his words had summoned it, the singing got louder. Close enough now that I could almost make out the melody, though the words remained foreign. It seemed to come from the hollow, drifting up through the trees like smoke. Fletcher suddenly stood up, his movements jerky like a marionette. He began walking toward the sound, his eyes still blank and staring. "Fletcher, no!" I grabbed his arm, but he pulled away with strength that shouldn't have been possible. He was a small man, barely 140 pounds, but he threw me aside like I weighed nothing. Miller tried to block his path, but Fletcher walked right through him, knocking the older man to the ground. Then he disappeared into the darkness, following that horrible singing down into the hollow. We lost him in the trees. His footsteps faded into the distance, and the singing stopped as suddenly as it had started. The forest fell silent again, but it was a different kind of quiet now, expectant, like something was waiting for us to make the next move. "We have to go down there," I said, though everything in my body was screaming against it. Miller nodded reluctantly. "Can't leave them. Can't leave any of them." We made our way back to the edge of the hollow as our dying flashlights barely lit the path. The cabin below looked different now, bigger somehow, with more windows than I remembered. Light spilled out of them in colors that weren't quite right, too red and too green, like someone had mixed blood with moss. The descent was treacherous in the near darkness. I slipped twice, and Miller had to catch me before I tumbled all the way to the bottom. But we made it, standing finally in the clearing where the impossible cabin waited. Up close, it was even more wrong than it had looked from above. The walls seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them, stretching and settling like something alive. The windows were dark now, but I could feel eyes watching from behind the glass. The door opened before we could knock. She stood in the doorway, like she'd been expecting us. Oh, older than old, with skin like dried leather and hair white as winter snow. But her eyes were young, bright and sharp as broken glass. She wore a dress that might have been fashionable a 200 years ago, and around her neck hung a necklace of what looked like bones. "Come in," she said, and her voice was like wind through dead leaves. "We've been waiting." The inside of the cabin made no sense. It was bigger than the outside, with rooms that stretched back further than should have been possible. Everywhere I looked, I saw jars and bottles filled with things I couldn't identify. Preserved animals floating in dark liquid, plants that seemed to move when I wasn't watching, and scattered throughout it all, personal belongings that didn't belong to any mountain witch. A child's baseball glove, a wedding ring, a pair of glasses, trophies from visitors who hadn't made it home, and there, in the main room, were the Rutherfords. They sat in chairs arranged in a circle, all of them staring straight ahead with the same blank expression Fletcher had worn. But something was wrong with their faces. They looked older than they should, like years had passed since they'd left their campsite 3 days ago. The little girl, who should have been 8, looked 12. Her brother appeared to be in his 20s. The parents had gray hair and wrinkled skin, and the grandparents looked like they were dying. "Time moves differently here," the witch said, reading my horror. "They're not dead, not yet, but they're aging, fast as mountain snow melts in spring. In a few more hours, they'll be used up entirely." "Let them go," I demanded, though my voice came out weak and shaky. She laughed, and the sound was like breaking bones. "Can't do that. They wandered into my hollow, disturbed things they shouldn't have disturbed. Now they belong to the mountain, same as you will." That's when I saw Fletcher. He was standing in the corner, but he wasn't aging like the others. Instead, he looked younger, like the process was working in reverse. His hair was darker, T.S. His lines around his eyes were fading, and when he turned to look at me, his face held an expression of perfect, childlike contentment. "Some folk the mountain keeps young," the witch explained. "The ones who accept their fate, who stop fighting what they can't change. They become my helpers, my eyes and ears in the forest. They're happy in their way. And the others? The others feed the mountain. Their years, their memories, their life force. It all goes back to the earth where it belongs." She gestured to the jars and bottles around the room. "I preserve what I can. Waste nothing. Take only what the mountain needs to stay strong." The witch moved closer, and I could smell her. Herbs and decay, old earth, and something sweet that made my stomach turn. When she reached out to touch my face, her fingers were cold as stone. "You're different," she said, studying me with those two bright eyes. "Mountain blood. I can taste it in the air around you. Your great-grandfather knew me, made promises he never kept." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Course you don't. City schools don't teach the old ways, but Samuel Ashford knew. Came to me in 1923 when the logging company wanted to clear-cut Devil's Backbone. He promised me protection, promised the hollow would stay hidden in exchange for safe passage for his family. 3 generations of Ashfords would serve the mountain, he said. My blood went cold. I'd heard stories about my great-grandfather, how he'd fought the timber companies, how he'd mysteriously convinced them to log elsewhere. But I'd never heard about any promises made to mountain witches. "He died before he could keep his word," she continued. "Your grandfather forgot the old ways. Your father turned his back on the mountains entirely. But you came back, didn't you? Came back when your life fell apart, seeking the peace these ridges could give you. Too. A hat doesn't mean I owe you anything. Doesn't it?" She gestured to the aging Rutherford family. "They'll be dead within the hour, unless someone takes their place. Someone with mountain blood. Someone strong enough to feed the hollow for years to come." I looked around the cabin, at the impossible size of it, at the jars full of preserved life, at Fletcher smiling his empty, contented smile. This was insane, impossible, but it was also real, and the Rutherfords were dying while I stood there trying to understand it. "If I stay," I said, "you let them go? The family goes free. The young ranger there keeps his new happiness, and you get to serve the mountain like your great-grandfather promised." She smiled, showing teeth that were too sharp. "It's a good deal, Marcus Ashford. Better than most folk get." I thought about my empty house, my failed marriage, my life that had fallen apart despite everything I'd tried to hold it together. What was waiting for me back in the world compared to this? At least here, my death would mean something. Would save 5 innocent people who'd done nothing wrong except camp in the wrong place. But then I remembered the hunting knife my grandfather had given me, the one I always carried on backcountry assignments. He'd made it himself, forged from old railroad iron, and he'd always said iron was good luck in the mountains. Iron. The witch hadn't touched me with her bare hands. She'd kept her sleeves between her skin and mine. And when Fletcher had tried to touch the symbols carved in the trees, Miller had stopped him. "Don't touch them," he'd said. Maybe the old stories about iron and supernatural creatures weren't just stories. I reached slowly for the knife on my belt, trying not to let her see what I was doing. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" "The mountain keeps all promises. That's the way it's always been." The knife came free of its sheath with barely a sound. The blade was 7 inches of hand-forged iron, sharp enough to skin a deer and black with age. I held it low, hoping the witch wouldn't notice until it was too late. "All right," I said. "I accept." She smiled wider and reached out to seal the bargain with a touch. That's when I struck. The iron blade sliced across her palm, and she screamed like nothing I'd ever heard. The sound shattered glass throughout the cabin, and black blood poured from the wound. She staggered backward, clutching her hand, and for the first time since I'd seen her, she looked genuinely afraid. "Iron," she hissed. "Mountain iron." The cabin began to shake. Jars fell from shelves and shattered on the floor, releasing things that had been preserved for decades. The walls started cracking, and I could see stars through the gaps where there should have been solid wood. The Rutherfords came alive all at once, gasping and looking around in confusion. The aging process had stopped, though they still looked years older than they should. The little girl ran to her parents, and they held her tight while trying to understand where they were. "Run!" I shouted. "All of you, get out of here!" They didn't need to be told twice. The family stumbled toward what had been the door, though it was hard to tell where the door was anymore with the cabin falling apart around us. The witch was changing, growing larger and more terrible. Her human appearance was falling away like a mask. revealing something ancient and hungry underneath. Her fingers extended into claws, her teeth became fangs, and her eyes burned with the light of a forest fire. "You cannot leave," she shrieked. "The mountain has claimed you." But the cabin was collapsing faster now, reality bending and twisting as her power weakened from the iron wound. I grabbed Fletcher, who was still standing there with that empty smile, and dragged him toward what I hoped was the exit. We burst out into the night air as the cabin folded in on itself like origami in reverse. The witch's screams followed us, but they were growing fainter, more distant. I herded everyone up the side of the hollow, pushing them to climb faster than should have been safe in the darkness. Behind us, the entire hollow was changing, trees uprooting themselves and the ground shifting like an earthquake. We reached the top just as everything went silent. Looking back, I couldn't see the hollow anymore. Where it had been was just normal forest, trees, and underbrush that looked like they'd been growing undisturbed for centuries. If I hadn't lived through what just happened, I would never have believed there had been anything there at all. But the witch's voice followed us through the trees as we stumbled back toward the original campsite. "You belong to the mountain now, Marcus Ashford. You can run, but these hollows will always know where to find you." We made it back to civilization, though the hike felt like it took forever. The Rutherfords had no memory of what happened after they'd arrived at their campsite. They remembered setting up camp, eating dinner, and then waking up in what they thought was a ranger station. The medical team that checked them out was puzzled by their aged appearance but couldn't find any explanation for it. Fletcher never spoke about what happened in the hollow. In fact, Fletcher never spoke about anything ever again. He retired on medical disability and moved to a small town in the valley, where he spends his days sitting on his porch and smiling that same empty, contented smile. Sometimes I drive by to check on him and he always waves like he knows me. But there's nothing behind his eyes except that strange happiness. Miller kept quiet about the whole thing, but he started avoiding certain areas of the mountains. He'd make excuses whenever a search called for going near the old Cherokee hunting grounds, and he never volunteered for solo assignments again. As for me, I aged 10 years in one night. My hair went gray, lines appeared around my eyes, and my hands developed the shake of an old man. The official report blamed stress and exposure. And maybe that. It's easier for everyone to believe. But I know the truth. The witch was right about one thing. I belong to the mountain now. Not in the way she wanted, not feeding her hollow with my life force, but connected to these ridges in a way I'd never been before. I can feel them now, the places where the old things still live. Hollows that don't appear on any map. Clearings where time moves differently. Caves that go deeper than geology says they should. The mountains whisper their secrets to me, and I use that knowledge to keep people safe. I've redirected 3 hiking trails in the past year, always finding reasonable excuses. Erosion, dangerous wildlife, unstable ground. But really, I'm keeping folks away from places they shouldn't go, things they shouldn't disturb. Because the witch was right about something else too. She wasn't the only guardian in these mountains. There are others. Things even older and more dangerous, sleeping in hollows throughout the Appalachian range. And now it's my job to make sure they stay sleeping. Some nights I dream about that cabin, about jars full of preserved lives and Fletcher's empty smile. I wake up wondering if I made the right choice, if maybe accepting the witch's bargain would have been simpler than living with what I know now. But then I remember the Rutherford family, alive and safe despite everything they went through. I think about all the other families who will never know how close they came to stumbling into places where the old ways never died. The mountains keep their own, like the title of every folk song ever written about these ridges says. But sometimes, if you're careful and respectful and lucky, they'll let you help keep others safe from what lives in the deepest hollows. Just remember this, if you're ever hiking in the Blue Ridge backcountry, if you find a trail that's not on your map, turn around. If you hear sing in a language you don't recognize, walk the other way. And if you ever see symbols carved into trees, symbols that seem to twist when you look at them too long, don't touch them. Don't even get close. Some hollows are older than maps, older than memory. And the things that live there are always patient, always waiting for the next group of campers who wander just a little too far off the marked trails. The mountain keeps its own, but it's always hungry for more. My name is Jonathan Moonwalker, and I've been a park ranger for 13 years. People always smile when they hear my last name, thinking it's made up or something, but it's real. Came from my Cherokee great-grandmother who married a Scottish man named Walker. The moon part got added when folks started calling him that because he could track animals at night better than most people could in daylight. I guess tracking runs in the family. I can follow a trail that's 3 days old, tell you what the deer was eating, and whether it was limping. My Cherokee grandfather taught me to read signs in the forest that most people walk right past. A bent twig here, a scrape on bark there. The woods talk if you know how to listen. That's why the disappearances in Red River Gorge had me so puzzled. It was October 1981, and the harvest moon was coming up full and bright. Beautiful time of year in Daniel Boone National Forest. Leaves turning gold and red, air getting crisp, and the hunting season bringing experienced outdoorsmen from all over Kentucky. These weren't city folks getting lost on nature walks. These were men who knew the woods like their own backyard. The first one was Earl Hutchinson, a local guide who'd been hunting these hills for 30 years. His wife called us when he didn't come home from checking his traps. We found his truck at the usual spot, gear still inside, but no sign of Earl. No blood, no struggle, no trail leading away, just nothing. Then Tommy Ridge went missing. Then old Pete Morrison. All experienced hunters. All disappeared during the 3 nights around the harvest moon. All left their trucks and gear behind like they'd just vanished into thin air. Sarah Red Bear, the park police officer working with me, had Cherokee blood too. Her grandmother lived on the reservation and still spoke the old language. Sarah was about my age, practical as a Hall's climber, and didn't believe in anything she couldn't put handcuffs on. But even she was getting spooked. "John," she said as we stood at Pete's abandoned campsite, "this doesn't make sense. Look at this fire. It's still warm, but his wife says he's been missing 2 days. I knelt down and studied the ashes. She was right. The coals were barely cold, maybe 6 hours old. But the tracks around the site were older, covered with morning dew that takes all night to settle. Maybe someone else was here, I suggested, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. There were only Pete's boot prints, and they just stopped. Right at the edge of the firelight, his tracks ended like he'd stepped off the world. That night, I stayed late in my cabin doing paperwork, but I couldn't concentrate. Something was wrong in these woods, something that didn't follow the rules I'd learned in 13 years of ranging. The forest felt different lately, too quiet during the day. And at night I could swear I heard things moving out there that didn't sound quite like deer or bear. My radio crackled to life around midnight. It was Sarah, and she sounded excited. "John, you need to get down to the gorge. We found them." "Found who?" "All of them. Earl, Tommy, Pete. They're alive, but John, something's not right." I grabbed my flashlight and headed out into the darkness, not knowing I was about to learn that everything I thought I understood about these woods was dead wrong. The 3 missing hunters were sitting around a campfire like nothing had happened. But when I saw their faces in the firelight, my skin went cold. Their eyes were different. Not the color. Still the same brown and blue eyes they'd always had. But there was something behind them now, something that hadn't been there before, like they'd seen things the rest of us couldn't imagine. "Earl," I called out as I walked into the circle of light. "Your wife's been worried sick. Where have you been?" He looked at me with those strange eyes and smiled. "Been? When did I leave?" 4 days ago. You went to check your trap lines and never came home." Earl's face went blank. He looked at Tommy and Pete, who seemed just as confused. "I just got here," Earl said slowly. "Set up camp maybe an hour ago." Sarah pulled me aside. "That's what they all say. They have no memory of the missing time. But John, look at their equipment." I played my flashlight over their gear and felt my mouth go dry. Their clothes were clean. Not just clean, but perfectly clean. No dirt, no wrinkles, no wear marks from days in the woods. Their boots looked freshly polished. Even their campfire was laid with mathematical precision, The kind of perfect setup you see in camping manuals, but never in real life. "And watch this," Sarah whispered. She picked up a small stone and threw it into the darkness beyond the firelight. Before the stone even hit the ground, all three men's heads turned toward the exact spot where it would land. Their eyes tracked something I couldn't see in the darkness. "Something's moving out there," Pete said quietly. "About 60 yards north, moving slow. Raccoon, I think. Big one." I strained my eyes but saw nothing. These men were good trackers, but nobody was that good. You don't hear a raccoon from 60 yards away in thick woods, and you sure don't see one in pitch darkness. "How do you know it's a raccoon?" I asked. Pete tilted his head like he was listening to something. "The way it moves, the sound of its breathing. I can tell." That's when I noticed their hands. All three men had small cuts on their palms. Identical cuts, perfectly straight lines about 2 inches long. Fresh cuts that should have been bleeding, but weren't. "How did you hurt your hands?" Sarah asked. They all looked down at their palms with surprise, as if seeing the cuts for the first time. "I don't remember," Tommy said. The other two nodded. "We tried to get more information, but it was like talking to people in a dream." Hay remembered arriving at their usual camping spots, but everything after that was a blank. They insisted they'd only been in the woods for a few hours, not days, and they kept doing things that shouldn't have been possible. Earl pointed toward a ridge half a mile away and said, "There's a deer up there. Young buck, maybe 8 points. He's favoring his left front leg." I looked where he was pointing but couldn't see anything except darkness. Even with binoculars, I wouldn't be able to spot a deer at that distance in daylight, let alone at night. "Want me to prove it?" Earl asked with that strange smile. Before I could answer, he cupped his hands around his mouth and made a sound I'd never heard before. It wasn't quite a deer call, wasn't quite human speech. It was something in between, something that made the hair on my arms stand up. From the darkness of the ridge, an answering call came back, then another. Then the sound of hoofbeats as deer began moving, not running away like they should have, but coming closer. "What did you just do?" Sarah asked, her hand moving toward her radio. "Called them," Earl said simply. "They understand now." Within minutes we could see shapes moving at the edge of the firelight. Dark forms that stayed just beyond our vision but close enough that we could hear them breathing. Deer, but also other things. Things that moved wrong, made sounds that didn't match any animal I knew. The three men sat calmly by the fire, completely relaxed, while Sarah and I pressed our backs together and tried to watch all directions at once. "We should go," I whispered. "Yeah," Sarah agreed. "Right now." But as we started to back away from the fire, Earl spoke without looking at us. "You can't leave yet, John. They want to meet you." "Who wants to meet me?" Earl smiled and pointed into the darkness beyond the fire. "Your real family, the ones who've been waiting for you to come home." That's when I saw the eyes, dozens of them, watching us from the shadows. Not animal eyes. These were different, older, hungrier, and they were all looking directly at me. I grabbed Sarah's arm and we backed toward my truck, but the eyes followed us, moving through the trees faster than anything should be able to move. The three hunters didn't even look up from their fire. They just sat there smiling while the darkness around us came alive with things that shouldn't exist. "The radio," Sarah whispered. "Call for backup." I fumbled for my radio, but when I turned it on, all I got was static mixed with something else. Voices speaking in a language that sounded almost like Cherokee, but older, stranger. Words that seemed to crawl inside my head and make my teeth ache. The eyes were getting closer. In the firelight, I could almost make out shapes behind them. Tall figures that moved too smoothly, too quietly. Human-shaped, but wrong in ways I couldn't name. Then Earl called out in that same strange language, and the shapes stopped moving. "It's okay, John," he said in English. "They're not going to hurt you. They just want to see if you're ready." "Ready for what?" Instead of answering, Pete stood up and walked toward us. In the firelight, I could see that his clothes weren't just clean. They were different clothes entirely. Not the worn hunting jacket and jeans his wife said he'd worn when he left, but beautiful buckskin clothes that looked handmade, old-fashioned Cherokee hunting clothes that belonged in a museum. "Where did you get those?" Sarah asked. Pete looked down at himself with surprise. I don't know. I was wearing them when I woke up by the fire." Tommy and Earl were wearing them too, I realized. All three men were dressed like Cherokee hunters from 100 years ago, in clothes that fit them perfectly despite being completely different from what they'd worn when they disappeared. "We need to leave," I told Sarah. "Now." But when I turned toward my truck, one of the shadow figures was standing right beside. Tut. In the moonlight, I could make out more details. It looked like a man, but taller than any man I'd ever seen. His skin had a gray cast to it, and his eyes reflected light like an animal's. He was dressed in the same style of buckskin clothes as the three hunters, but his looked ancient, worn smooth by centuries of use. When he spoke, his voice sounded like wind through pine trees. "John Moonwalker, son of the Cherokee. We have been waiting for you to accept your heritage." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, but my voice cracked. Because part of me, some deep, buried part, did know. My grandfather's stories came flooding back. Stories about the Nunahai, the spirit people who lived in the mountains and taught the Cherokee how to hunt. Stories I'd dismissed as folklore. "Your grandfather knew us," the figure said. "He learned from us. Now it's your turn." More shapes emerged from the darkness. Not just one or two, but dozens. All tall, all gray-skinned, all watching me with those terrible bright eyes. The Nunahai. The immortal hunters my grandfather had told me about in whispers when I was small. "The humans are forgetting how to hunt with honor," another voice said from the shadows. "They kill for sport instead of need. They waste what they take. They have no respect for the balance." Sarah pressed against my back. She was shaking, but she had her gun drawn. Not that bullets would help against spirits. "These three understood," the first figure continued, gesturing toward Earl, Tommy, and Pete. "They were good hunters who respected the old ways. So we taught them, made them better. Now they can hear what the animals hear, see what the animals see. They are part of the hunt again." Earl nodded. "It's amazing, John. I can track a mouse in the dark. I can call any animal to me. I know where every deer in these mountains is sleeping tonight." "But you do." "And remember the past 4 days," I pointed out. Earl's smile faded. "That part, that's harder to talk about. We were somewhere else, somewhere that isn't quite here. Learning things, seeing things." "What things?" Tommy spoke up. "The real forest, the forest underneath this one, where the Nunahai keep the animals that died out long ago. Wolves the size of horses, cave bears, things that lived here before the white men came. And we hunted with them," Pete added. "Hunted the way our ancestors did, when hunting was sacred." One of the Nunahai moved closer to me. "You have the gift, John Moonwalker. You track better than any human in these mountains. But you could be so much more. I'm not interested." "You will be." Before I could ask what he meant, the figure raised his hand and blew something at me. Dust or powder that sparkled in the moonlight. It hit my face and went straight up my nose, down my throat. The world exploded into sensation. Suddenly I could hear everything. Every insect in the grass, every bat in the sky, every small animal breathing in the forest. I could smell individual deer from miles away, could tell which ones were sick, which ones were pregnant, which ones were old and ready to die. And I could see them, all of them. Like heat signatures in my mind, every living thing in the forest showed up as a bright spot of light. I knew exactly where they were, what they were doing, what they were feeling. "This is just a taste," the Nunahai said. "Come with us for 3 days and we'll teach you to hunt as your ancestors hunted. You'll never lose a trail again. You'll understand what the animals are thinking. You'll become a true hunter." The offer was tempting. More than tempting. It was everything I'd ever wanted. To be the best tracker in the world. To understand the forest completely. To connect with my Cherokee heritage in a way I'd only dreamed about. But looking at Earl, Tommy, and Pete sitting by their fire with those empty spaces in their memories, I knew the cost would be higher than the Nunahai were telling me. What happens to people who say no? I asked. The shadows moved closer. No one says no, John Moonwalker. Everyone wants to be a better hunter. That's when Sarah made her move. Sarah fired 3 quick shots into the air and shouted into her radio. All units to Red River Gorge. Officer needs assistance. The Nunahai didn't seem bothered by the gunshots, but they paused when she mentioned other officers coming. The lead figure tilted his head like he was listening to something. More humans, he said. They will interfere. Let John and Sarah go, Earl called from the fire. They're not ready yet. Give them time to understand. But the Nunahai shook their gray heads. Too late. They have seen us. They cannot leave unchanged. That's when I realized the truth. Earl, Tommy, and Pete weren't rescued victims. They were bait. The Nunahai had let them go so they'd be found, knowing it would bring me here. Because somehow these spirit hunters had decided I was special, that I was the one they really wanted. My grandfather told me stories about your kind, I said, playing for time. He said you were teachers, not kidnappers. We teach those who are willing to learn, the lead Nunahai replied. But the old ways are dying. Soon there will be no humans left who understand true hunting. We must preserve the knowledge. By forcing it on people, by any means necessary. The spirit moved toward me, and I felt that strange dust working in my system, making my senses sharper, but also making it harder to think clearly. I could smell Sarah's fear, hear her heart pounding, feel the warmth of her body behind me. I could track every one of the Nunahai in the darkness around us. But I could also sense something else. Something Sarah's grandmother had told her whispered in Cherokee during their phone call earlier. Sarah, I said quietly, what did your grandmother say about iron? Iron burns them, she whispered back, like salt on a slug. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my multi-tool. Stainless steel with iron content. Not much, but maybe enough. The old stories also said you could only take someone who came to you willingly, I told the lead Nunahai. That you couldn't force anyone to become a hunter. The spirit's eyes narrowed. Times change. Rules adapt. No, I said, standing straighter. You're breaking your own laws. That's why you had to drug me with that dust, because you can't take me by force, and you know I won't come willingly. Around us, the other Nunahai began to shift restlessly. I was right, and they knew it. The Cherokee don't steal people, I continued. They don't take away memories. They don't turn hunting into something dark and frightening. You're not preserving Cherokee traditions, you're corrupting them. The lead Nunahai's face twisted with anger. You know nothing of tradition, half-blood. You wear white man's clothes, carry white man's tools, serve white man's laws. I serve the forest, I shot back. I protect it from people who would destroy it. That's more Cherokee than anything you're doing. The spirit lunged at me, fingers stretched like claws. I met him with the iron blade of my multi-tool. When the metal touched his skin, he screamed, a sound like wind tearing through dead trees. His gray flesh smoked and bubbled where the iron cut him, and he stumbled backward. Iron! One of the others hissed. He has iron! But there were too many of them, and I only had one small blade. They circled us like wolves, staying just out of reach but getting closer with each step. That's when Earl spoke up from the fire. Leave them alone. The Nunahai turned toward him in surprise. You do not command us, human. No, Earl said, standing up. But I learned your lessons, and one thing you taught me is that true hunters protect the innocent. Tommy and Pete stood up beside him. He's right, Tommy said. John and Sarah haven't done anything wrong. They're good people trying to do their jobs. We volunteered to learn from you, Pete added. But these two didn't. Taking them by force goes against everything you taught us about honor. The 3 hunters moved to stand between us and the Nunahai. In their buckskin clothes with their enhanced abilities, they looked almost like spirits themselves. but they were still human enough to remember right from wrong. The lead Nunahai snarled, "You choose them over us? Over the power we gave you?" "We choose what's right," Earl said simply. The spirit world erupted in chaos. Some of the Nunahai attacked the three hunters, while others came for Sarah and me. I slashed with my iron blade, cutting any spirit that got too close, while Sarah kept firing her gun. The bullets didn't hurt them, but the noise and muzzle flashes were enough to confuse them. Earl, Tommy, and Pete fought with abilities beyond anything human. They moved like shadows, struck like lightning, and seemed to know where each attack was coming from before it happened. But there were too many Nunahai, and the spirits were getting angrier. Just when it looked like we were overwhelmed, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world: sirens. 3 Park Service vehicles came roaring down the trail with their lights flashing. The Nunahai froze as armed rangers poured out of the trucks. "Everyone on the ground!" one of them shouted. But the spirits were already fading back into the darkness. The lead Nunahai pointed at me with one long finger. "This is not over, John Moonwalker. The forest needs true hunters. We will find another way." "Find a better way," I called after him. "One that honors the old traditions instead of twisting them." The Nunahai vanished like smoke, leaving only Earl, Tommy, Pete, Sarah, and me standing around the dying campfire. The other rangers found us standing in a circle, looking like we'd been through a tornado. Earl, Tommy, and Pete still wore their buckskin clothes, but as the sun came up, the beautiful Cherokee hunting outfits faded away like morning mist. By full daylight, they were back in their regular clothes, though they still had those strange cuts on their palms. We told the rangers a simplified version of what happened. The 3 men had been found alive but confused, possibly drugged by someone camping illegally in the area. The rangers searched for signs of whoever had taken them, but of course, found nothing. How do you track spirits? The effects of the Nunahai dust wore off over the next few hours, and my senses went back to normal. But Earl, Tommy, and Pete kept their enhanced abilities. They could still track like nothing I'd ever seen, still call animals to them, still sense things the rest of us missed. "It's permanent," Earl explained when I asked him about it. "Once you learn to hunt their way, you don't forget. Are you okay with that?" He thought for a long moment. "Yeah, I think I am. But I'm going to use it right. Help track poachers, find lost hikers, things like that. Not just for my own benefit." Tommy and Pete agreed. The 3 of them formed an unofficial group they called the Forest Guardians, using their supernatural abilities to help park rangers and search and rescue teams. They were careful not to let anyone know just how good they'd gotten, but their success rate in finding missing people went through the roof. Sarah and I never talked directly about what we'd seen that night, not in detail. But sometimes, when we were working a difficult case, she'd mention something her grandmother had told her about the old spirits, and I'd remember something my grandfather had said about the Cherokee ways. The disappearances stopped. Whatever the Nunahai were doing, they weren't taking any more local hunters. But I knew they were still out there. Sometimes, on nights when the moon was full and the forest was quiet, I'd catch glimpses of gray figures moving through the trees, watching, waiting. They'd said this wasn't over, and I believed them. But I also believed what I'd told them that night, that there were better ways to preserve Cherokee hunting traditions than kidnapping people. Over the next few months, I started spending more time with Sarah's grandmother and other tribal elders, learning the old stories and the old ways. Real Cherokee ways, not the twisted version the Nunahai had been teaching. I developed a program for the Park Service that combined traditional Native American conservation methods with modern wildlife management. It was popular with visitors and effective at protecting the forest. More importantly, it honored my Cherokee heritage without forcing anyone to lose their memories or their free will. 6 months after that night at Red River Gorge, I was leading a group of junior rangers through the forest when I found something that made my blood run cold. A perfect circle of mushrooms about 20 feet across, with no plants growing inside it. The locals call them fairy rings, but I knew better. In the center of the circle was a single eagle feather and a note written on bark in Cherokee syllabics. Sarah's grandmother translated it for me later. When you are ready to learn properly, we will teach you properly. The forest remembers those who serve it well. I kept the feather in my cabin, and sometimes, late at night, I'd hold it and wonder what might have happened if I'd made a different choice that night. Would I have become something more than human? Would I have lost myself in the process? I'll never know for sure. But every morning when I put on my ranger uniform and head out into the Daniel Boone National Forest, I remember that there are older laws than the ones in my handbook, older guardians than the ones wearing badges. The Nunahai are still out there, still hunting, still protecting the ancient ways. And maybe that's not entirely a bad thing as long as they remember that teaching and taking are two different things entirely. Some nights when the harvest moon is full and bright, I think I can hear them calling to me from the deep forest. But I don't answer. I've got my own way of serving the woods now, my own way of honoring the Cherokee traditions. And that, I think, is exactly what my grandfather would have wanted. My name is Beth Wildmoon, and I've been a park ranger for 11 years. I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. It was October 1976 when Buck Morrison called me at dawn. His voice was shaky, which wasn't like him at all. Buck had been a game warden for 20 years and didn't scare easy. "Beth, you need to get to Panther Creek Campground right now." "What's going on?" "Just get here, and bring your tracking gear." I threw on my uniform and grabbed my equipment bag. The drive to Panther Creek took 40 minutes through winding mountain roads. Fall colors painted the trees, but fog hung thick in the valleys. Something felt wrong about the morning. Too quiet. Even the birds weren't singing. Buck met me at the campground entrance. His face was pale, and his hands shook as he lit a cigarette. "Tell me what happened," I said. "Family of 4 from Richmond, the Petersons. They were attacked last night around midnight." "By what? A bear?" Buck shook his head. "That's what I thought. But you need to see this." He led me to campsite 12. The tent was shredded to pieces, sleeping bags scattered everywhere. A cooler had been thrown 20 feet into the trees. But what made my stomach drop were the claw marks on the nearby oak tree. They started 8 feet off the ground and went all the way up to 12 feet. "No bear made those," I said. "Gets worse. Look at this." Buck walked me over to a patch of soft dirt near the creek. There in the mud were paw prints, unlike anything I'd ever seen. They looked like a big cat's prints, but wrong. Instead of 4 toe pads, these had 6. Each print was the size of my hand. "Mountain lion?" Buck asked, but his voice said he didn't believe it. I knelt down and measured the prints with my ruler. Mountain lions have been gone from these mountains for almost 100 years, and they sure don't have 6'2" US. "The family?" "Alive, but barely. Dad's got deep scratches across his back. Mom's in shock. Kids won't stop crying. They all tell the same story." "Which is?" Buck took another drag of his cigarette. "They say it was a cat. A big cat with 6 legs. Yellow eyes that glowed in the dark. And it didn't attack to eat them. It attacked like it was playing with them. Like it enjoyed scaring them. I've studied animal behavior my whole career. Predators don't play with their food unless they're cats, but no cat gets that big, and no cat has 6 legs. Where's the family now?" "Hospital in Waynesboro." "But Beth, there's something else. Old Tommy Crow Eagle showed up this morning. You know him?" I nodded. Tommy was Cherokee, one of the few elders left who still knew the old stories. He lived alone in a cabin up on Eagle's Ridge. What did he want? Soon as he saw those tracks, he got real quiet. Then he looked at me and said, "The Wampus cat has returned." Said it like it meant something terrible. A chill ran down my back. I'd heard that name before in Cherokee legends my grandmother used to tell. Stories about a woman who was cursed and turned into a monster. A 6-legged cat that hunted people for revenge. But those were just stories. I was a scientist. I dealt in facts, not fairy tales. "Buck, we need to cast these prints and take pictures. Send them to the lab in Richmond. There's got to be an explanation." "Sure, Beth. But what if there isn't?" I spent the rest of the morning collecting evidence. The prints were clear and deep, pressed into the mud like the creature weighed hundreds of pounds. I found tufts of dark fur caught on broken branches. The fur was coarse, almost like wire. By noon, storm clouds were building. I finished my work just as the first raindrops started falling. As I packed up my gear, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were fresh prints leading away from the campsite. They followed the creek bed for about 50 yards, then turned and headed straight up the mountain, up toward where I lived. The rain started, coming down harder. Within minutes, the new prints were washed away. But I'd seen enough to know that whatever attacked the Peterson family was still out there. And now it was moving toward my part of the mountain. 3 days later, the lab results came back. Dr. Sarah Chen called me personally, which never happened unless something was very wrong. Beth, I've been studying animal tracks for 15 years. These prints you sent me, they don't match anything in our database. What do you mean? The size suggests a cat weighing between 200 and 300 pounds, but the pad configuration is impossible. 6 toes arranged in a pattern I've never seen, and the depth of the impression suggests claws at least 4 inches long. Could it be a genetic mutation? Some kind of abnormal mountain lion? Mountain lions haven't been confirmed in Virginia since 1882, and even if one existed, this level of mutation? It would be a scientific miracle. After I hung up, I sat at my desk staring at the photos. 6 perfect toe pads, each with a claw mark. The stride length between prints was over 4 feet. No normal animal could move like that. Buck knocked on my door around 3 o'clock. We got another one. My heart sank. Where? Hiking trail about 2 miles from your place. Single male, mid-30s. Name's David Garrett. We drove to the trailhead in silence. The victim was conscious, but badly shaken. Deep scratches ran from his shoulder to his elbow. He sat on the back of an ambulance while paramedics cleaned his wounds. Mr. Garrett, I'm Ranger Wildmoon. Can you tell me what happened? He looked up at me with wide, frightened eyes. You won't believe me. Try me. I was hiking alone. About 2 miles up the trail, something started following me. I could hear it moving through the trees, keeping pace with me. But when I'd stopped to look, nothing was there. Go on. Then I heard the sound, like a woman crying. But wrong somehow. Too deep, too angry. I turned around and saw it watching me from about 30 feet away. What did it look like? Like a mountain lion, but bigger, much bigger, and it had 6 legs. The front 4 were normal, but it had 2 extra legs coming out of its sides, and its eyes. He shuddered. They weren't animal eyes, they looked human, intelligent, like it was thinking. What did it do? It didn't attack right away, it just sat there watching me. Then it smiled. I swear to God that thing smiled at me. When it finally came at me, it was playing, like a house cat with a mouse. It could have killed me easily, but it just wanted to hurt me. The paramedic finished bandaging Garrett's arm. He's lucky. A few inches higher and these claws would have hit an artery. After the ambulance left, Buck and I searched the attack site. We found the same 6-toed prints, this time in soft earth under the trees. But we also found something new. Scratches on a birch tree formed a pattern, not random claw marks from climbing. These looked intentional, almost like symbols. Buck, you ever see markings like this? He studied the scratches and shook his head. But I know someone who might have. Tommy Crow Eagle. We should talk to him. Tommy's cabin sat on a ridge overlooking the entire valley. He was waiting for us on his porch, as if he knew we were coming. You found more tracks, he said before we could speak. Yes, sir, and some kind of markings on a tree. Tommy nodded slowly. Show me. I took out my camera and showed him the photos of the scratched symbols. His face went grave. Cherokee writing. Old Cherokee. Older than most people remember. What does it say? Remember me. That's what it says. Remember me. Buck leaned forward. Tommy, you know what this thing is. Tell us. The old man was quiet for a long time. He spoke. Long ago, there was a Cherokee woman named Iwa. She was curious about the men's sacred ceremonies. Women weren't allowed to watch, but Iwa hid and spied on the ritual. As punishment, the medicine men transformed her into a creature, half woman, half cat, 6 legs so she could never run fast enough to escape her shame. They called her Iwakana, the Wampus Cat. That's just a legend, I said. Tommy looked at me with ancient eyes. Is it? Your great-great-grandmother was named Elizabeth Morrison. She married a man named James Wildmoon in 1876. She was present the night Iwa was cursed. My blood turned to ice. How do you know that? Because my great-grandfather was the medicine man who performed the transformation. The curse wasn't just on Iwa. It was on everyone who witnessed her shame and did nothing to stop it. The Wampus Cat hunts their bloodlines. Buck went pale. Morrison? My family name? Tommy nodded. 3 families were cursed that night. Morrison, Wildmoon, and Garrett. Garrett? But that was the name of the man attacked yesterday. Yes. The pieces fell into place like a nightmare puzzle. The attacks weren't random. The creature was hunting specific people whose families had wronged it over 100 years ago. How do we stop it? I asked. Tommy stood up slowly. The curse can only be broken by acknowledgement and restitution. Someone from each cursed family must face the Wampus Cat and make things right. And if we don't, it will hunt your bloodlines forever, your children, their children, all the way down through the generations. Thunder rumbled overhead. The storm that had been building all day was finally here. There's something else, Tommy said. The Wampus Cat grows stronger with each hunt, and it's just getting started. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside made me jump. The wind in the trees sounded like crying. Around midnight, my dog Rex started whining and wouldn't settle down. I got up to check on him and found him pressed against the back door, trembling. Outside in my yard, I could see yellow eyes watching from the tree line. The creature sat motionless, maybe 50 feet away. In the moonlight, I could make out its shape. Bigger than any mountain lion should be, with those extra legs extending from its sides. Its face was almost human, but wrong. The intelligence in its eyes was terrifying. We stared at each other for what felt like hours. Then it opened its mouth and made that sound David Garrett had described. Like a woman crying, but deeper and full of rage. The sound of something that had been hurt beyond repair. Then it was gone, vanishing into the shadows like smoke. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I found tracks all around my house. The creature had circled the building several times. On my front porch, scratched into the wood, were more Cherokee symbols. I took photos and drove straight to Tommy's cabin. Your turn, he translated. Your turn. It's coming for me next. Yes, but not yet. It's still playing. Building fear. The Wampus Cat feeds on terror before it feeds on blood. Over the next week, the attacks escalated. 2 more hikers were attacked and survived. A family camping at Devil's Backbone found their tent surrounded by 6-toed prints when they woke up, though they weren't harmed. Each attack followed the same pattern. The creature would stalk its victims, let them know it was there, then attack just enough to hurt and terrify, but not kill. Buck started staying at his brother's house in town. That thing came right up to my bedroom window, he told me. Just stood there, watching me sleep. When I turned on the lights, it was gone. I threw myself into research, trying to find some rational explanation. I studied every case of large cat sightings in Virginia. I read about genetic mutations and evolutionary anomalies. Nothing fit. The truth was staring me in the face, but I was too stubborn to accept it. That changed on Thursday night. I was working late at the ranger station when I heard scratching at the door. Long, slow scratches like claws dragging across wood. I grabbed my flashlight and service pistol. The scratching stopped. I waited 5 minutes, then opened the door. The creature sat in the middle of the parking lot 20 feet away. This close, I could see details that would haunt me forever. Its fur was dark brown, almost black, with silver streaks. The extra legs were smaller than the main four, but fully functional. And its face, God, its face was almost human. A woman's face stretched over a cat's skull. It looked at me with recognition. Not just an animal seeing prey, but a person seeing someone they knew. Someone they blamed. Ewa, I whispered. The creature's ears perked up. It tilted its head, studying me. Then it spoke. Not with words, but with a voice that formed in my mind. You know my name. Your blood knows my pain. I raised my gun, hands shaking. Stay back. Metal cannot harm me. I am beyond such things now. The creature stood and began walking toward me. Each step was deliberate, confident. I fired 3 shots at center mass. All 3 bullets passed right through it like it was made of mist. Your great-great-grandmother watched them curse me, watched them steal my humanity. Did nothing. That wasn't my fault. I wasn't even born. Blood remembers. Blood pays. The creature was close enough now that I could smell it. Not the scent of an animal, but something else. Old wood smoke and bitter herbs. The smell of ancient rituals. It reached out with one massive paw and touched my face. The claws were cold as ice. In that moment, I saw flashes of memory that weren't mine. A young Cherokee woman hiding in the bushes. Men in traditional dress performing a ceremony. The woman being discovered. The terrible transformation that followed. Now you understand. Now you feel what I felt. The creature stepped back. But understanding is not enough. The debt must be paid. How? Face me when the moon is dark. Come to a place where I was made monster. Bring the others who carry cursed blood. Make your choice. Break the curse, or join me in eternal hunting. The creature turned and walked away, disappearing into the forest. I stood there shaking for 10 minutes before I could move. I called Buck and told him what happened. Then I called David Garrett. Both men were quiet when I explained what we had to do. So we're supposed to meet this thing in the woods and what? Apologize? Buck asked. Tommy said it requires acknowledgement and restitution. We have to try. And if it doesn't work? I looked out my window at the dark forest. Somewhere out there, the wampus cat was waiting. Then we die. But at least the curse dies with us. Our kids won't have to live with this. The new moon was in 3 days. We had that long to prepare for a confrontation with something that shouldn't exist, but very clearly did. Tommy Crow Eagle led us to the sacred site at midnight. It was a clearing deep in the mountains, surrounded by old-growth trees that predated European settlement. In the center stood a circle of stones covered in Cherokee symbols. This is where it happened, Tommy said, where Ewa was transformed. Buck carried a shotgun loaded with silver buckshot, though we all knew it wouldn't help. David Garrett clutched a crucifix and muttered prayers. I brought offerings, tobacco, sage, and a pouch of cornmeal that Tommy had blessed. The night was still and cold. No insects chirping, no wind in the trees. Even the forest seemed to be holding its breath. What exactly are we supposed to do? David asked. Tommy pointed to the stone circle. Stand inside. Wait for her to come. When she appears, acknowledge what your families did. Ask for forgiveness. Mean it. And if she says no, then you die tonight and the curse continues. We stepped into the circle. The stones were warm despite the cold air, or as if something burned beneath them. I could feel power in this place, old power that made my skin crawl. We didn't wait long. The wampus cat emerged from the tree line like a shadow, coming to life. In the moonless night, her eyes glowed like lanterns. She moved with impossible grace for something so large, her 6 legs carrying her in a flowing motion that hurt to watch. She entered the circle and sat facing us. Up close, the human aspects of her face were even more disturbing. I could see what she had looked like as a woman. Beautiful, with high cheekbones and intelligent eyes. The curse had twisted those features into something monstrous, but the person underneath was still there. "You came," her voice echoed in our minds. "Good. Now we finish what your blood started." "Iwa," I said, my voice shaking. "We're here to acknowledge what was done to you. Our families witnessed your punishment. They should have spoken up. They should have stopped it. They watched me lose my humanity. They did nothing." Buck stepped forward. "My ancestor, Daniel Morrison, was there that night. I'm sorry for what he allowed to happen." David nodded. "My great-great-grandfather, Thomas Garrett, was also present. I ask your forgiveness for his silence." The creature's eyes fixed on each of us in turn. "Pretty words. But words are wind. What will you sacrifice to balance the scales?" Tommy had warned us about this. The curse required payment, not just apology. "What do you want?" I asked. "Your lives, your blood to replace mine." "There has to be another way." The Wampus cat stood and began pacing around us. "For over 100 years I have been trapped between worlds. Neither human nor animal. Neither living nor dead. Your family's cowardice created this prison. Only blood can break it." "Then take mine," I said. "I'm the one who has to live with what my family did. Let the others go." Noble, but incomplete. All 3 bloodlines must pay. Buck raised his shotgun. "Like hell." The creature moved faster than the eye could follow. One moment she was 10 feet away. Next, she had Buck pinned to the ground, her claws pressed against his throat, not quite cutting skin. "Your weapons are useless here. I am spirit made flesh. I cannot be killed by mortal means." "Please," I said. "There has to be another way to break the curse." The Wampus cat released Buck and turned to face me. For a long moment, she just stared. Then slowly, the monstrous features began to shift. The cat aspects faded, revealing more of the human woman underneath. "There is one other way." "Tell us." "The curse binds me to hunt your bloodlines forever. But if you 3 willingly take my burden, I can be free. You would become the guardians of these mountains, protectors instead of hunters. The curse would be broken, but you would be changed." "Changed how?" "You would become like me, neither fully human nor fully animal. You would live as long as these mountains stand, keeping the balance between the human and spirit worlds." Buck shook his head. "That's still not living. That's just a different kind of prison." But I understood. This was what Tommy had meant by restitution. Not just acknowledging the wrong, but accepting responsibility for fixing it. "Our families helped create this situation," I said. "Maybe it's time we helped solve it." David looked terrified. "You're talking about giving up our humanity. We'd be saving our children, our grandchildren, all the future generations of our families." The Wampus cat waited while we debated. She seemed almost hopeful, like someone who had been carrying a terrible burden for far too long. Finally, Buck spoke. "If we do this, the curse ends? Our kids are free?" "Yes. The debt would be paid, the balance restored." I thought about my nephew in Richmond, Buck's twin daughters, David's son, who was starting college next year, all the future generations who would be haunted by something that happened before they were born. "I'll do it," I said. Buck nodded slowly. "Me too." David took longer to decide, but finally agreed. "Yes, okay, yes." The Wampus cat's form shimmered and changed. For just a moment, she looked fully human again, a beautiful Cherokee woman in traditional dress with tears running down her face. "Thank you," she said with her actual voice. "Thank you for setting me free." She placed a hand on each of our foreheads. Power flowed through me like electricity. Every cell in my body was being rewritten, changed into something new. The pain was incredible, but so was the sense of purpose that came with it. When the transformation was complete, I felt different, stronger. My senses were sharper, my connection to the natural world deeper. I wasn't human anymore, but I wasn't a monster either. The spirit of Ewa smiled one last time, then faded away like morning mist. The curse that had bound her for over a century was finally broken. That was 30 years ago. Buck, David, and I still look the same as we did that night. We've become the protectors Tommy said we would be, keeping the balance between the human and supernatural worlds. We prevented a mining company from desecrating a Cherokee burial ground. We've guided lost hikers to safety when they wandered into areas where the spirit world bleeds through. We've kept other dark things from troubling the people who live in these mountains. It's not the life I planned, but it's a good life, a meaningful one. The Wampus cat is gone, but her story lives on in Cherokee tradition. Tommy Crow Eagle passed away 5 years ago, but not before teaching the younger generation about the importance of respecting the old ways. Sometimes tourists ask me about the Wampus cat legend. I tell them it's just folklore, stories made up to explain things people didn't understand. They usually laugh and take pictures of the fake warning signs someone put up as a joke. But occasionally, a visitor will see something in my eyes that tells them I know more than I'm saying. Those are the ones who respect the mountains and follow the Ulyss. The ones who understand that some places demand reverence. The curse is broken now. Buck's daughters have children of their own, and David's son just became a grandfather. They live normal human lives, free from the supernatural debt their bloodlines once carried. As for us three guardians, we'll remain as long as these mountains need us. It's our choice now, not our burden. And that makes all the difference. Last week, a camper reported seeing a large cat with 6 legs near Panther Creek. When the new ranger investigated, she found only normal deer tracks and the remains of a picnic some careless visitors had left behind. But I smiled when I heard the report. The mountains have their own ways of reminding people to show proper respect. Some creatures exist between worlds, demanding reverence for powers older than human understanding. I learned that lesson the hard way. Now I help teach it to others. The Cherokee say that every mountain has a spirit. I've learned they're right about that, and about a lot of other things too. The important part isn't whether you believe in legends, it's whether you respect them. Because sometimes legends have claws.